We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered, and indeed, many questions this week. There's kind of been an explosion of questions sent in, so we'll see what we can do.
Everybody's getting very optimistic now that the vaccines seem to be rolling out. Like
there's
hardcore.
Part of that. The weather's warming up and getting nicer. It's all those types of things.
Tell that to my allergies. Oh my god. So I apologize in advance for the sniffing, snorting, sneezing. I usually don't cough, but now that I've said that, I'm sure to cough. I have a cough
in your head
at
now.
Some point, but I am going to sneeze. That is, I can already feel it. But in Florida, there's very few weeks out of the year that you can open up your windows and just allow the outside in, because it's either far too cold, which happens about, 10 to 20 days of the year, or it's ridiculously hot, which is 9 to 10 months out of the year. So there's this short window where you can actually open your windows, and since I have a 17-year-old son who smells like socks 24 hours a day, we are trying to air out this house as much as we can, which means everybody's cold and cranky. So if you hear screaming in the background, it's not you. It's my wife yelling at my kids because they're not in school, or they are in school, or they're supposed to be doing something else, or more likely it's near the end of the semester and everybody's grades suck because they all suck. Yeah. Fun. But this is AVRant, the podcast. I'm sorry. I channeled my inner DJ there for a second. The podcast. Anyways,
you did have a long talk with him. That was, yes.
I did. Yes, I did. I did. I should not have been drinking during that. That was the big problem. But towards the end there, I got a little, I'm like a happy, people who drink and they get angry or whatever. I get super talkative and happy. You imagine how I am normally. Now, if there was a button if I had a turbo button, that's me. I get extra sarcastic, extra, I think I'm hilarious, extra, I want to laugh at everything. I just have a good time.
All right.
So
anybody who wants to hear more of Tom and not quite so formal as he is on this podcast, if you want to say he's even formal here, then there's 3 hours of Tom and DJ talking over on the Bright Side Home Theater podcast.
Literally killed my computer.
Yeah, that's right.
I killed my computer. I don't plug my computer in for these things because reasons, but there's the dog. Anyways, so I said, DJ, I don't think I have my computer died. Yep. It's whatever. I guess we're done. All right, so AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. You go to avrant.com, leave us a comment there, facebook.com/avrant podcast, youtube.com/avrant. You can contact Rob directly, rob@avrant.com. His Twitter's @FirstReflect. I'm Tom @avrant.com. My Twitter is @avrant_Tom. Now, let's get to our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, support the podcast in some way. If you want to do it financially, go to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and leave us a PayPal donation. We want to thank Ari for doing that this week. Thank you very much, Ari.
Yes, Ari, thank you for that PayPal donation. Really do appreciate that. I did see one person, I think, in one of the questions that came in on Monday, so it won't be on today's topic list, but saying, how do I donate to the podcast? Easiest way, come to the website, avrant.com, and on the right hand. You know what? If you were looking at it on your mobile device, that might be the reason you didn't see it, because it is only the desktop version where on the right-hand side the donation links show up. So that's a good thing to mention from time to time. Haven't done so in a little while, so I'll say it now.
There's probably a menu or something that you have to drop down to get to that. But there's also our Patreon, so patreon.com/AVRant podcast. We have 122 patrons right now. We want to thank all 122 of you for signing up to be a contributing supporter, an ongoing supporter of this podcast. Once a month, Patreon will take some money from you, whatever you tell them to, and they'll give most of it to us. So thank you to our 122
For
patrons.
sure, patreon.com/AVRant podcast for anyone who would like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation. And great to see that number is growing back. So hopefully we'll get 125 and beyond. 122 patrons at the moment. And thank you very much for your support.
I want to thank, if you can't support us financially, we will thank you for whatever you have done. But since we're not psychic, you will have to tell us what it is. So Mark wrote a customer review of the Epson 5050 UB on Epson's website and mentioned us. Dale told SVS his substantial order for his uncle was all thanks to us. Between the theater, the 2.1 music setup, and a living room setup that we didn't even know about, Dale's uncle ended up ordering 3 PC2000 Pro cylinder subs, the prime speaker setup we suggested for this theater, no towers, hope the bookshelf fronts deliver the goods, they will, bookshelf speakers for the music setup, and a whole prime satellite setup for the living room. And just to complete the story, he did get the JVC NX5 projector and a 110-inch screen for the theater. So that's a lot of speakers.
It is.
That is.
That is.
I think I was the one who told him not to buy SVS. For the
Yeah,
other
you said to
systems.
mix it
Like,
up.
Be different.
And I said, hey, if you're going to order them all for the same place, because any of them that you don't like, you can send them back for free. So that is the way they went. It was convenient to order it all at once. I'm sure SVS is perfectly happy with that and happy to see our name mentioned. So Dale, thank you for mentioning us. Mark, thank you for mentioning us in your customer review that you posted on Epson's website. And yeah, just a quick thing on Dale's uncle there. It's a good thing you went with the 110-inch, because I was like, wait a second. The room's only 14 feet front to back. Can you even throw a 120-inch with an NX5? And you can't. You can't. It wouldn't physically fit. The projector is 19 inches from front to back. So effectively, he's going to have 12 feet from lens to screen in a 14-foot long room, because you need some at the back there for the cables.
Yeah.
And 111 inches is the biggest you can throw in a 16:9 from 12 feet lens to screen. So a very good thing he decided to go with the 110.
Good job. We also thank Bertrand, who bought a whole bunch of products from I'm sorry, I just completely put that in there. Electronicsforless.ca, which is a website. I don't think, have we talked about this place? I don't know that we have. Anyways, he bought a nice 3-in-1 TV stand, which had become strangely difficult to purchase, and he told them that we sent him that.
Yes, I mentioned electronicsforless.ca to Canadian listeners if they write to me on Twitter or email, because they're a good website. They're actually the official reseller of SVS in Canada. They have sort of a sub-site called Sonic Boom Audio, but it's owned by Electronics for Less. So they do get mentioned by me to Canadian listeners. Bertrand is in Quebec, so he is a Canadian listener. And yeah, 3-in-1 TV stands. Very hard to find, but Electronics for Less has some, so all good. Thank you, Bertrand.
So we also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going during these hopefully soon to be receding trying times, where we change the end of our podcast to go out and listen to something again.
I'm looking forward to it, man. That's going to be a momentous occasion. A tear might come to my eye.
My tear, I might be bawling like a baby. So we got notes of gratitude from Dan, Bob, Mark, and Joe. So thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Dan, Bob, Mark, and Joe. They're all some monosyllabic names right there. But yes, thank you very much for the notes of gratitude and encouragement for keeping us going. We've kept it going this long. No intention to stop now, and light at the end of the tunnel. So yes, hopefully, and fingers crossed.
So Clint DeBoer, my good friend and partner over at avgadgets.com. Please go check out the website. I pissed off a whole bunch of audio files last week.
Sure.
So whoop, whoop. Which one did I publish that made him so mad? Was it the magic one? I don't remember, because I wrote another one that's even worse. That I haven't published yet because I want to let them stew in this one for a while. But I wrote one that's called "For Audio Files, Magic is Real."
Okay.
And boy, the one person went on Facebook, and I didn't know you could do this, but you could unrecommend a website.
Okay.
Did you know that you could do that?
I didn't know that.
Like, does not recommend AV Gadgets. And he called me acute, but I think he meant obtuse.
Yes.
But he said the cute reader. I almost responded back, I think you're cute too, just to mess with him. But he unrecommended us. I was like, thank you. I didn't know that was a possibility. I'll take it.
More people will check you out as a result.
Anyway, so yeah, I got unrecommended from somebody because I wrote about how for audiophiles, magic must be real in order for them to believe the crap they believe. But I've got a worse one coming.
Then you'll have to do the other side, the objectivist only side. Get onto that.
Right. Yeah, we could do that one too. So Clint forwarded a product release announcement from Ornamental Decorative Millwork. This is a Novo Buildings product company. It's called CoverTrim. It's a 5¼ inches tall. It's a baseboard and crown molding with an intentional gap left behind it. The idea is that you don't have to take down your old baseboard or mounting, or molding, as long as it's smaller than 5¼ CoverTrim gets installed right on top, but Clint recognized that this might be a great way to run speaker wire and other cables around your room and then hide it behind your baseboard or crown molding. It'll be a little tight. The crown molding should be fine, but the baseboards will be a little tight for HDMI unless you put the cable there and then install around it because of the size of the connector. I don't know you'd be able to pull it through, but speaker wire should be just fine. So really, really good solution there. Andrew. This comes from Andrew. Paradigm announced their new Founder series speakers. I did not know about this. 3 tower models, bookshelf, large center, and LCR model. Price-wise, they're more expensive than the Prestige series, and they are expected to replace, but still significantly less expensive than the flagship Persona series. I'm starting to feel like they're just naming these things after like really popular animes.
Well, all the things that were out there were all started with the letter P, except for the Monitor series. But now things are changing. They're changing it up
now they're going
to
for
the
F,
Founder series, which looks like it'll be taking the place of the Prestige series.
So the $1,100 each for the bookshelves, $4,250 each for the largest tower, $1,700 for the 3-way LCR model. That's a little
pricey. But it's not up to the flagship prices. So yeah.
So there are a number of new features that we haven't seen from Paradigm before. They're using aluminum magnesium alloy for the mid-range and tweeter. Everything gets shock-absorbing mounting points, including the outrigger feet on the tower models and the individual drivers themselves. They get shock-absorbing mounting points.
That was questioned by the write-up over at Audioholics. They're like, why, if you talk about how inert your cabinet is, why do you need shock absorbers on the mounting of the drivers themselves? But nonetheless,
the whole driver's going to go in and out. I mean,
well, it's the little thing around it, but whatever. They're putting shock absorbing everywhere. I did enjoy seeing shock absorption built into the spike feet on the outriggers. I'm like, that's fantastic.
So the spike feet securely attached to the ground, and then you put a rubber gasket on top of it so it can bounce?
2 of them, in fact. There's like an inner and an outer rubber gasket on the spiked feet so that, it doesn't...
Not everybody's an innie. Some people are outies.
Translate to all the vibrations into the floor. I'm like, I enjoyed seeing that. Got a kick out of that.
Yeah. Tapered edges for the cabinets and extensive internal bracing, including a slanted vertical brace, are meant to reduce internal standing waves, which is code for we put a bunch of stuff in here. And probably the biggest change, the large center and LCR models have coaxial drivers, which is very unique for them, where the dedicated mid-range acts as the waveguide for the tweeter. Lastly, the largest 120H tower, they call it a hybrid model as it has its own built-in 1,000 watt amplifier to power its 3 8-inch bass woofers. I already hate it. Don't buy it. And it also has Anthem ARC or ARC Genesis to measure and apply room EQ to the bass. Don't do that. Don't do that one.
There you go. Founder series for Paradigm fans. Something you might want to consider. I was just, the most interesting thing to me was seeing the use of coaxial drivers, because Paradigm, as far as I'm aware, has not done that before. It makes sense. They've gone to this quite large waveguide that they're using on all the tweeters. And so if they had used that same large waveguide on the center speakers and done it in a vertical arrangement with a separate dedicated mid-range driver below it would have been a real chunky tall speaker. So they decided to use the mid-range driver as the waveguide and put it in the middle. It is not concentric. It is not like a KEF design where it is a concentric driver arrangement. It is coaxial, so they do not share the exact same depth placement of where the tweeter meets the mid-range driver. I'm not sure if the tweeter is further back in or further forward, but there you go.
Innie or outie, we haven't decided yet. Yeah. Right, and I know that I immediately said I don't like these, at least the ones with the powered.
That's
drivers,
only the
but it's just such
top one.
It's just such a hassle.
Yeah.
To me.
Well,
so who wants that? Who wants that?
The crowd that is not going to have a subwoofer, and they insist on seeing the figure that makes it look like this speaker can play without a subwoofer, because why care about the room?
Yeah. So see, I I don't know if I published this one yet either, but I wrote an article about why you don't need tower speakers.
In fact, that's kind of coming up. Somebody asked a question about that.
So, yeah. And then I wrote one about why you might need tower speakers.
There are times.
Because there are times. I mean, they make them for a reason, but most of the reason they make them is because people will spend more money on them. And it is an exceedingly common occurrence that when you buy the tower version of a speaker, what you're getting is the bookshelf version of said speaker with a included stand. Like the bottom 2/3 of it will just be empty space that's not connected to anything. Like the top part of the speaker is completely isolated from the bottom. But all right, this comes from Carl. Sonos' newest speaker is their cheapest and smallest yet. $169. Sonos Roam. Does it have is it like a Roomba? Is it like
Not quite. You have to pick it up and take it, but you can, cause it's
2.5 inches by is that inches?
Yep.
Right, 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches by 6.5 inches in size, with waterproofing, a 10-hour battery, and both Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. There's an optional $50 charging dock if you don't want to plug in the USB cable. God, they ask for a lot of money for their stuff. I mean, this is not
Sonos.
A special thing. I mean, it doesn't have any waterproofing, 10-hour battery, and Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. You know what has that? Like $20
a gazillion
speakers
things, yes.
Yeah. I actually wrote an article about those too. Hold on a second. I'm going to find it so we can link it up.
Those other ones don't connect to the Sonos network. That is what you're paying for, is to connect to the Sonos network. This certainly is less expensive than their first portable speaker that Sonos introduced, which was the Sonos Move. That was a $500 speaker. So this is much less expensive and much smaller, and likely has no bass to speak of whatsoever and can't play as loud. But, for taking it around with you and then bringing it home and being connected back to your Sonos network, that is something that this can do. What I don't know for sure is whether you could use these as truly wireless surround speakers. Since they run on the same platform as all the other current speakers, I'm thinking that's a possibility. They did mention that you can get 2 of the Sonos Roam and connect them so that they work in stereo when you're just on their own. So yeah, I'm not sure if you can use them as truly wireless surrounds, but I think that possibility is there.
So for $169.
That's right.
Yeah. Byron, this is comments from our listeners. Byron received his RBH SV-661/R speakers with their folded ribbon tweeters that he was hoping would be an upgrade over his SVS Ultra bookshelves in center. This is the one that he was debating between the folded ribbon ones or which was a bookshelf, a large bookshelf, or the tower speakers, which you could get a deal on, but didn't have the folded ribbon tweeters. Right. We were like, you don't need to upgrade, period. But if you're going to, go for the folded ribbon. So where did he go? He got the folded ribbon ones, and he loves them. He says they're so clear, so detailed, so neutral, and even though they aren't the tower form factor he envisioned, they remain perfectly composed at very high SPLs, or sound pressure levels, or volume, for those of you. He is very happy he bought them. No buyer's remorse, and best of all, his wife absolutely loves them too. The quality of the finish is stellar, and to him, the price difference makes sense and can be justified. Yay.
Yep. Yeah. Congratulations. Happy to hear a happy ending to this story. Very glad you're happy with them. I do think if you were going to do it, that was the right way to go. So he does not disagree. He is not sad that he doesn't have the physical tower form factor. And he did mention in his email, he's like, yeah, if I was like making a recommendation to like 99% of people out there, he'd be like, yeah, go get some SVS Ultras. They were really, really excellent speakers. But, he had money burning a hole in his pocket. So he goes, there you go. He's happy with those.
Yeah. Well, it's like anything else. There's a law of diminishing returns when it comes to a certain point. And yes, you can get better. Yes, it will cost a lot more. And no, most people won't enjoy it or appreciate it or need it. So, for a lot of people, you can say the primes are just fine. They don't need the Ultras at all because they're not going to appreciate them or anything else. But anyways, James shared the difference between the printed fabric image he got from Spoonflower versus the dye sublimated fabric image he got from a company called Minuteman Press in BC, Canada. The dye sublimated version looks obviously superior, with the black being much closer to black and the dark parts of the image not looking washed out the way the printed version does, and everything looking much more vibrant as a result, but James is not 100% happy with it. The colors are not accurate to the original image he sent in. They are oversaturated, so if the idea is to take an existing image and have it recreated but in acoustically transparent form, this still doesn't quite nail it. So we're looking at these two things right here, and there's this child's little weird ghostly hands.
There's a little bit of blur in that image. Somebody was moving
something
when
going
the
on
shutter
there.
was
They
snapped.
look like they have claws. Anyway, so the one's clearly superior
Yes.
to the other. I mean, it's quite obvious. Now, again, if you are going for, I want to have room treatments and I want them to look like art and have them be up on the wall and be whatever, then this is, either one of these would be fine, because once you put them on the wall, you're going to not really being them. But one is clearly superior to the other one. The fact that he's still not happy with it is because he's also comparing it to the original.
That's right.
So,
Which, I mean, that's a fair criticism, because we have
too.
said definitely ourselves, like, if you already have artwork on the walls or you already have family photos or something, that something you could do is have those very same images printed onto fabric and then, replace what was already there with something that looks identical but has acoustic benefits. If you were, being critical about, I mean, especially when it's artwork or something that you paid good money for, and you're saying, well, what I want is for it to look as close to identical as possible. Well, with their process, and I mean, I don't know anything about Minuteman Press, but whatever they did, like, it looks good. If I didn't have something to compare it to, I'd be like, hey, that's a darn good looking image on an acoustically transparent fabric. But when you do have the original and the idea was to recreate the original and the colors don't match, well, that's a perfectly valid criticism. So I'm glad that he sent that in. It's something to be aware of.
It's going to be hard too, because in order for a fabric to be acoustically transparent, it by necessity almost needs to be sort of thin.
Sure.
And how are you going to get those deep blacks, those saturated colors, when you're stretching this admittedly fairly thin fabric over the top, or at least porous fabric over the top of something? It's going to be a compromise. To me, I'm looking at these and going, well, either one of these would be fine. But I can see why he's in some ways disappointed.
Sure.
So Mark says he can vouch for the Elac Debut OW42 or 42 on-wall speakers. They mount completely flush and provide a clean look, but they're definitely not as small as you might imagine, which, is almost always the case when you're buying online. They're a good candidate, he says, for making yourself a cardboard model first. So far, so good on their sound quality, he'd recommend them. So he's got a picture here of a Ultra HD Blu-ray disc whose boxes I can still not really remember if are. I think they're smaller than regular Blu-rays, right?
No, Ultra HD Blu-ray, the box is the same as regular Blu-ray. Regular Blu-ray and Ultra HD Blu-ray are smaller than a DVD case.
Yeah. Right. So this, you can see there's quite a bit of space around it, top and bottom, left to right. It's pretty close, but
it's good to have that for scale,
speaker.
And but yeah, mounted on the wall, especially next to his acoustic panel. I'm like, yeah, that does look slick and clean. It would be hard to look at that and go, oh, that's a eyesore of an installation. So yeah, that's very good, and glad that you are happy with them in an overall sense.
Yes. Herb let us know that we can keep saying Cross Spectrum Labs. His consulting company is Cross Spectrum Acoustics, and that's the main business. The Cross Spectrum Labs is basically a subsidiary that focuses on the microphone calibration. So we were right, and whoever told us not to say that anymore was wrong. That's all.
That was me. I just saw. I think there was actually an announcement on the Cross Spectrum Acoustics Twitter account, and that was a year and a half ago or something like that. They're like, our name is Cross Spectrum Acoustics, and I was like, okay, I'll run with that. But there you go. We are allowed to say Cross Spectrum Labs because we're almost always talking about the calibrated microphones. So Herb has cleared that up for us, and thank you, Herb.
We have said that quite a few times, and I imagine that's not going to
stop. And if you Google searched
soon.
it would get you to the right place, so it's still perfectly fine.
All right, let's get to these questions, I guess, because we have a lot of them. We're going to get through as many as possible. I don't know when we started exactly, but I have a heart out of it, too, because I have a kid I got to take to practice. So, and also, I'm tired. Evans and Paul. Evans put up a wall in his basement so he could have a dedicated enclosed theater space. It's small, 11 by 13, but by keeping his gear in an adjacent room, he created enough space to have the 2 rows of seating that he really wanted. Scrolling through, lots of pictures on the walls, 2 rows of seats. The back row is off the back wall, but maybe barely. It looks like
a little bit of space, but it's pretty close to the back wall.
Yeah. I don't think it's an actual brick wall, right? That's just
it's fireplace.
Faux brick stuff. Oh, is this a fireplace?
Yeah.
So it is brick. So he's got a brick area there, the fireplace area. He's covered up the fireplace
Curtained it off.
Fabric and hopefully done something else. I don't know. It's like a big bass sink. Anyways. Back when we only had one couch in the room, he installed a pair of overhead speakers for Atmos. His current Onkyo receiver maxes out at 7 speakers, so that was the most he could do. But now that he's installed a second row, he also moved his front row forward, and now that single pair of overhead speakers is basically in between the 2 rows. He figures he'll upgrade to 5.2.4 configuration at some point in the not too distant future, but what do we think is the best way to tackle the overhead situation? Should he stick with 5.2.2 and just move the existing pair forward, add a second pair so that he has 4 overhead speakers, but where should the second pair go, and should the existing pair be moved? If he installs 4 overhead speakers but sticks with his 7-channel receiver for a while, should he wire the overhead speakers in series so they're at least making some sound? So they're a little bit behind you right now is basically what he's saying.
His front row, yeah. I mean, they're like in between the 2 rows of seats. That's where his single pair.
They're installed in the ceiling, though.
They are, yeah. If you look at the one where you can see the fireplace, then you can sort of see the circle up there, and that's like, yeah.
Yeah. I would leave those right there for right now. I mean, I don't really see a reason to start cutting holes in walls and stuff. So, what would I do if these were not already installed? Where would we put our speakers? So you have your back row is basically on the back wall. Your surround speakers are in the back corners, kind of angled in. It looks like from what I can see. So I guess I would actually leave them exactly where they are, and then put a top fronts or front heights or whatever they are. Maybe I kind of want 4 overhead speakers, but that back row is going to end up not getting a very good experience.
Well, I mean, that's the real question is how much are you valuing the experience in the back row? That's question number 1, because if the answer is very little, then let's just for the sake of argument, imagine that you don't have that back row and say, how would we set this up for the front row? Because if that's effectively what we care about is the front row, then do things that way. If we were to imagine that you didn't have any speakers already installed in the ceiling and all you cared about was the front row, then you do, the positional wise, you would have them where top fronts and top rears would be, which would be about 4 feet in front of you and 4 feet behind you. Now, for reasons that we've talked about in the way that DTS-X decodes things, we would probably label them as front heights and rear heights, but in terms of the physical positions, it's where in the Dolby diagrams you would see the top fronts and the top rears installed, which, like I say, about 4 feet in front of you, 4 feet behind you. Now, if you do care about that rear seat, the question I would have for you is, what is the type of experience that you prefer with Atmos? Because some people really like to hear it as discreetly as possible, as though sound is right above them, and then other people like the atmospheric sound where you can't totally pinpoint, you just get a sort of fuzzy sense of forward, back, left to right. Because if what you like most is really discreetly hearing things directly from overhead, I could even get on board with essentially having 4 speakers that are like, 2 of them are right above the back couch and 2 of them are more or less right above the front couch. You would probably still label them top fronts and top rears to get the steering correct, but you would get that sense that sounds are coming from right above you. I don't personally recommend doing that. I want to have a bit of a diffuse sound. I don't want, really noticing that it's right above, particularly the ones that are supposed to be your top fronts. I don't want those sounds as though they're coming from directly above me. So either way, the end result is I would recommend that I would have 4 overhead speakers, because otherwise you don't get front to back steering in any of the overhead sounds. And regardless, I would have them installed some distance in front of your front row. I agree with Tom that if what you primarily care about is the front row, I would leave the pair that you already have and just install another pair that are about 3.5, 4 feet in front of you. That's what I would do.
I think that the ones that are behind you aren't technically far enough behind you, but I would not cut another hole in my ceiling.
We're talking logistics at this point. Yeah. Like you say,
I wouldn't move them
if you didn't already have them, we'd probably have them about 4 feet behind you, which it doesn't look like they are right now. But because they're already there, we're not going to tell you to move them.
Yeah, I would put them a little bit in front of you. Yes, I agree with that. So Paul has a very similar question. Paul's room is bigger, roughly 12 by 23 feet, but he also wants 2 rows of seats and only has a 7-channel receiver that won't be upgraded right away. Where should he put his the 2 overhead speakers to start? And how much better is 4 overhead speakers than 2, particularly when you have 2 rows of seats? but it's sort of the same answer here. It depends on how much you care about that second row of seats. So, and which one is your primary row? I mean, because I've seen plenty of theaters where the back row is actually the primary row that they want to sit in, but they have an extra row like really close to the screen that is for kids or people they really don't like. So is it better to have two than two pairs than one pair? Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it just makes the steering possible.
You just can't steer sounds forward to back and in a full circle around you if you only have two. And you can only move things side to side.
So then you have a choice. You kind of have a choice between, how you're going to place these things. Because if you're trying to get that back row to be part underneath, in between the two sets of speakers, then basically I would put the top rears just barely behind the back row, and then the top fronts would be a little bit more than barely in front of the front row.
I do a minimum of 2.5 feet in front of the front row. I'd probably aim more for like 3.5, 4 feet as we normally would.
This is assuming that the front row is the most important row.
Yeah, assuming that. Yeah, I mean, so in all instances, if you really only care about one row of seats, then we're going to say
the other one doesn't exist.
About 4 feet in front, 4 feet behind. That's just what we're going to do. And the other row of seats gets whatever it gets. If you care quite a bit about both rows of seats, then I would want to have the top front speakers, or as we might say, we might label them front heights in the receiver, but the ones that are positionally top fronts, I would want them some distance in front of the front row, and I would want the top rears a little bit behind the back row so that all of the seats are within the positions that they're supposed to be. And that's where sort of the argument of why, if you have 2 or especially 3 rows of seats, that distance might become so great that having top middles, having 6 overhead speakers, actually starts to make a lot of sense. But in general, you're going to have to decide whether you care a lot about both rows, and then just make sure that the seats that you care about are sort of within the 4-speaker layout. Now, when actually in both of these instances, the idea that you can only process 2 overhead speakers right now because you have a 7-channel receiver, but you're going to install 4 speakers should you wire them in series so that all 4 of them are making sound. I mean, basically, I don't have a problem with, you're going to run the speaker wire anyway. You can make the series connections back at the receiver.
Yes, that's the important part. Yeah, make them back at the receiver, not in the ceiling.
Yeah, not in the ceiling. You run all 4 of the speaker wires back to your receiver location like you would do anyway. And then if you want to try connecting the red receiver output to the red input of speaker number 1, let's say it's the left front speaker, and then the black output of the receiver to the black of speaker number 2, which is like your left rear speaker in this instance, and then at the receiver end, you just connect the remaining 2 speaker leads to each other. You've created a series circuit, and give it a try. I got no problem with that. And if you don't like it, then you disconnect one of them. As for Paul's question of if he's only going to install 1 pair first and not even install the second pair, let alone use them yet, I would do the top front positions. That's the one that's going to get the most information out of most soundtracks. It would be a bit weird to install physically top fronts and top rears and then only play the top rears. That wouldn't be the way I would do it. So if you're only going to do 1 pair, I would do the top fronts in that instance.
Dave wants a 2.1 channel receiver or integrated amp with proper bass management. He does not need HDMI inputs. He didn't mention anything about room correction. What do we recommend? I recommend that you have room correction and you buy a receiver.
Yeah,
honestly, yeah. I would because no one cares. The receiver's going to be perfectly fine with you not using the rest of those channels, right. And many times they were. The rated power is into 2 channels anyways. So sometimes two channels at 1 kilohertz, but 2 channels at least. So you're getting the full thing. So obviously Denon, Marantz, Yamaha. Yamaha would be the choice if you cared about HDMI inputs, but he doesn't care about HDMI inputs. So really, to me, it would come down to, because he's not going to use most of the features of these things, the room correction.
Sure.
Which room correction do you care most about? And how important is it to you, because the bass management will not be a problem.
Right.
You know, even in the most basic receiver these days, they got the bass management down. So
yeah, I mean, I kind of wonder
it would
if,
be that.
like, because he's right that if you look at a lot of dedicated stereo amplifiers, integrated amplifiers or receivers, they don't have subwoofer output of any kind. Or if they do have like a summed output that you could connect to a subwoofer, it isn't full bass management with, you know, both a low pass filter on the subwoofer output and a high pass filter on the speaker. It's just everything is getting full range signal. So I kind of wondered if he was like envisioning that you could pay less and get a 2.1 receiver. It's just not the case. The
it doesn't exist.
The cheapest models are going to be like 5.1 at a minimum. That's just kind of the way that it goes. So if you're looking for things that you can just do all in one, you just plunk your money down. It's got everything you need, including some pretty decent bass management. Probably my top choice would be like a Denon X1600. Because you can still get those. They're about $500. You can get them at accessories for less. Factory refurbished with a full, 1-year manufacturer's warranty for $500. Really can't beat that. Costco has been sold out of the Yamaha TSR 700 for a while now. I assume they'll come back at some point because it was a very popular model, and it is just the RXV6A, but with a different model number so that it's exclusive to Costco and they sell it at a lower price. So maybe keep an eye on Costco because that TSR 700 is a darn good model, and that has the highest end version of YPOW, Yamaha's room correction, that has the reflected sound control and actually has fur filters in it and all that. So I can get on board with that. If you're like, I for aesthetic reasons, I just want one that's a 2-channel only. Like here, I can suggest to you Yamaha's RN803. That has the highest end version of YPOW in it. It is stereo only, but with a dedicated subwoofer output and proper bass management. But it's $750. It's more expensive than the surround sound version receivers.
Well, it's an economy of scale.
That's right.
They don't sell 2.1 receivers anymore because no one wants 2.1 receivers anymore. So you asking for one is not like they spent less money making it. They spent more money making it because they have to make fewer of them.
Denon does have a stereo receiver with bass management. It's called the DRA 800, but it doesn't have any room correction of any kind. And now that one, accessories for less, they're sold out right at the moment I'm saying this. I don't know if or when they'll get more stock, but it was $450 at accessories for less. It's $550 new. So again, new, it's more expensive than the surround sound versions. If you want something a little bit...
Look at this empty space inside this Yamaha receiver. It's just empty box in there. It's just like 1/3 of it's just like, nah, we're good.
If you want something a little bit off the beaten path, SVS's Prime wireless sound base. That could potentially be an option. Doesn't have any room correction of any kind, but it does have bass management and a subwoofer output, and you control it. The only way you can control it is through the DTS Play-Fi app. So if that's 100% what you want, but that's $500. So it's no cheaper than a full surround sound AV receivers. So all in all, performance-wise, I would point you to a full surround sound AV receiver. Like I say, the Denon X1600H would be my top choice because you can still get those and at a very affordable price these days. The one thing is, none of the things I just mentioned have pre-outs. If you were thinking that in the future I might want to connect to, say, an outboard mini DSP with Dirac built in or something like that, and then have...
Or an amp,
and then have separate amplification, there I would point you to a Marantz Slimline. Because a Marantz Slimline, while more expensive than any of the things I just mentioned, is not drastically more expensive, works right out of the box as a full AV receiver, including Odyssey Mult EQ, not XT. They don't have XT in the slim lines, which is why I like the X1600H from Denon better, because that's multi-EQ XT. But, the Marantz Slimline would work right out of the box, and then it also has pre-outs if you want to add on to it later. So, yeah, that would be a consideration.
Okay. Infinite Gary. Gary says now that he has his 16-channel mono-price monolith HTP1, he's only using 11 of the speakers that are available to him. So.
No front wides.
Gary has the option of using the spare outputs to connect to as many as 5 individually EQ'd subwoofers. He's already got 2 subs already and was strongly considering adding a third. Monoprice mentions on their website how the HDP One now supports Direct Live bass control, which is an add-on feature to Direct Live, specifically for managing multiple subwoofers. It's their take on sound field management, and they talk about how it allows for more flexible subwoofer placement. Gary has no issues at all as far as output levels, but how much better would 3 subwoofers plus direct bass control be versus just his 2 subwoofers as they are now? Well, so when we talked with Todd Welty, we talked about this sort of brute force method of making bass better in your room. If you don't want to do it that way, then the easiest way to do it is to have an enclosed room that's a rectangular square or something along those lines, and put 2, 4, 6, an even number of subs in there, and then place them, mirrored to each other. So opposing corners, midpoints of the walls, blah, 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 on and on and on. So would I get a third subwoofer and then play with this? I would not. I would get 2 more subwoofers and then not have to do all this. Or more likely, since I think Gary's like literally the only person in this house that's paying attention to any of this stuff, I don't see why you need any more subwoofers whatsoever. I mean, you want to play with it, that I get. So, it's just call SVS, buy one, and if you decide I don't really like having one extra one, I'll get a second extra one, and then I'll have 4. They'll still give you a discounted price for buying the dual subs. So you could do it. I mean, you're going to. I don't know why you asked, but you're going to do this. Well, so go with speed.
What's interesting about Gary is that he absolutely loves this stuff and absolutely loves trying things out, but doesn't particularly like to get into the super granular trial and error, little bit at a time, because I
don't blame him for
that's
that.
Just tedious, and that part he doesn't find fun, and I'm totally fine with that, because not everybody wants to do that, no matter how much you love this stuff. So the answer of how much better could 3 subwoofers with direct live bass control be than 2 subwoofers is anywhere from substantially better to hardly any better at all, because it really depends on how good your dual subwoofer setup is performing right now. If you're already, he only has 1 seat that he cares about. He doesn't have any concerns about a large seating area.
And not only that, he has full control over where he places a sub.
Yes.
So it's not like he's got
not
2
completely, because in the room that he's in, it has like doors and closet doors and stuff. So it isn't 100% freedom of where subwoofers can go. But aesthetically, he doesn't have concerns.
Certainly he can find 2 mirrored locations in this room that he could place his 2 subs at. So I have a hard time believing he doesn't have at least a fairly optimal subwoofer placement for his 2 subs. It's when I have 3 spots for subwoofers in my room, and none of them are mirrored to any of the other ones. And I've got the 2 that I've got, and it's not working out if I add a third to this one other spot. That's when, to me, these sorts of questions become relevant. Not I've got 2 subs, I can put them wherever I want, barring doors and stuff. And should I add a third? The answer is no, you probably shouldn't. I don't think you'll notice a difference.
But the possibility is there simply because with the way direct live bass control works, it is their take on sound field management, which is you put your subs essentially anywhere you want. You wouldn't want to have them literally all stacked. That wouldn't give you, but it's spread pretty much anywhere around your room. It measures each of them individually, but then calculates their sum total and applies individual level delay and equalization to get you to a summed output, either in the entire listening area that you took your collection of measurements, or in Gary's case, it's going to be all centered around 1 seat, but it crunches the numbers. So it's taking the tedium out of it, right? It's not dissimilar from the Earl Getty's approach. It's essentially identical to what Multi-Sub Optimizer does, but automated, other than you having to move the microphone around and say, okay, proceed to the next measurement. After it's taken the measurements, it does all the number crunching for you, applies all of the filters for you, and as long as you leave your subwoofers where they were and don't touch their controls, it's going to do a darn good job, because the math on it is solid and the implementation of it is done, correctly, as well as can be done within the limits of physical boundaries. So for someone like Gary, I can see this having value because, for all the things we explained, he's fine with spending the money on it. He's fine with the aesthetics of having these subs spread around. He doesn't want to spend the time on the tedium. So the chances are this will get him to a really great result. It's you could do it by spending less money but taking more time, which tends to be the way that Tom and I favor coming at things. But when you don't want to do that, if you're like, I just want to press the button and have it go, I'm like, yeah, this will get you there. This will get you there.
I still bet he doesn't notice the difference. I don't think he's going to notice the difference. I not that he can't notice it. I don't think there's going to be a very noticeable difference by adding this third sub, unless those other two subs are somehow not placed properly. Right. Or if he's like, I have put these subs here and I'm tripping over them all the time.
I would love to be able
to move them. Yeah, I would like to move this one over here, but now they won't be optimally placed. Yep. What do I do? I think that might be a valid reason to do it too. Russ. A while back, Russ questioned whether to get a 77-inch OLED or go for a 65-inch with an articulated wall mount so he could pull the TV forward. He ended up with the 77-inch and the articulated mount, because why buy one when you can buy both?
That's right.
He loves the results, and the TV pretty much only gets pushed back against the wall when absolutely necessary. The bigger field of view is definitely nice. See, this is what I don't like about articulated mounts, is that no one ever pushes them back.
But, but it can be. That's kind of nice. It's like when he gets to the situation where it has to be, he can.
My parents have one too, and my mom is neurotic about pushing it back. So it does happen, but the majority of houses I go into, it's like you might as well have just bought a stand and put it on the stand, because it's always out in the room anyways. So he says he knows the advice we give for the Apple TV 4K is to set it to 4K SDR, then use the match frame rate and match dynamic range features, but he didn't like his screen going blank and flickering sometimes when it was switching between the different content, so he tried leaving the Apple TV 4K in Dolby Vision and no frame rate switching. He really enjoys the seamless experience and faster navigation, and even though his OLED is always in Dolby Vision mode now, actual SCR contact doesn't look that bad at all. So is the Apple TV 4K just putting everything in the Dolby Vision container, as it were, without actually messing up the signal? Is he crazy to opt for this setup instead of what we recommend? What is he sacrificing? Well, you're not getting it native sent to the TV and letting the TV do its thing to it. You're having the Apple TV do a thing to it and then send it over, and the TV just goes, okay, well, I know what this is. I'll just put it up as it was sent to me. The reality is, we can tell you how to do something, but if you try it another way, you're like, this is fine for me. That's fine for you. We're not the boss of you. The fact that you know the difference is what is important. That's the only thing I care about. Like, I don't care if somebody goes out and buys, a super expensive speaker cable. I don't care. I care that they know that they're buying the cable because it's pretty, and not because they're buying the cable because they think it's going to make their speakers sound better. That's the only thing I care about. I want you to have the knowledge. So you have the knowledge that if you put it in a different setting, you'll get a different result, which is technically more accurate. But you've tried the less accurate way, and you're like, I don't care that much.
And you prefer the user experience, which is I think that's great. Completely reasonable thing to value more, especially when you're like, the visible results are fine by me. So, I mean, yes, objectively, you are no longer getting 24 frames per second output. Now, when I look at all the articles out there about what is the best streaming player, and, a lot of them are what's the best value or what provides the most access to the most services or has the lowest price, I look at all, and I don't think I've ever seen one of them say, the reason you've got to get this one is because it does 24 frames a second. So you can tell how valuable the majority of people out in the world really think that feature is. Now, to me, it's supremely important. I can't live without it, and I can't live with soap opera effect. So if I want to not see judder, my source device has to output 24 frames a second. In fact, it has to be able to output 23.976 frames a second, because I don't want any individual frame stutters every 48 seconds of video. So I'm an outlier, but technically I am correct. But worrying about it if you're not bothered by a little bit of judder sometimes, slow panning shot and there's a little bit of judder in it, if that doesn't bother you, because that's what we've all been watching on all television all the time for as long as any of us can remember, then you're good to go. Is SDR content placed into the Dolby Vision container? Because that is essentially what's going on. There's a translation function that's going on, because the the color gamut is expanded, the dynamic range is expanded, so it is having to make a translation in the original standard dynamic range signal so that it works within the Dolby Vision signal that's being sent out. But does it like drastically mess up your colors and contrast? No, on the video side it doesn't. In the menus it kind of does. I'm sure you've noticed that your menus look a little bit weird when it's in Dolby Vision all the time. They're kind of blindingly bright on anything that's white. But as long as that doesn't bother you, video by and large, again, can I measure some things and say objectively it isn't 100% correct anymore? Yes, I could. But even I will say it's not to the point that it's really a problem. So the menus, I think, look a little bit wonky, but other than that, I think you're perfectly reasonable to do what you've done.
So he tried comparing some of his Ultra HD Blu-rays to the same movie streaming in 4K from Apple Movies. With this AV receiver set to reference volume, the disc versions were very obviously louder. Isn't there supposed to be an industry standard? If not, and Apple Movies versions are quieter, doesn't that render reference volume meaningless? There is an industry standard, which is 105 peaks for whatever, and then 115 for the days,
I heard
right?
one industry insider, he's like, it frustrates me when people say 105 because like the proper way to say it is that reference volume is 85 dB plus 20 decibels of headroom. I'm like, okay, I'm fine with saying it that way,
right,
if
fine.
It prevents
85 plus 20 dB. That's great. Okay,
which
so
gets you to 105, by the way.
that being said, there's no reference volume police out there, and there should be, I think, but there's not. You can tell that just based on the fact that TV commercials are so much louder than their actual content, even though there's like laws passed that make it so it's not supposed to be that way. Does it make it meaningless? I mean, no, we have to have a standard. But the fact that the 4K versions, I mean, the streaming versions aren't as loud or louder, I mean, I go through your Apple TV 4K to your each individual services and tell me that they're all the same volume, because they're not. Yeah. I mean, I think YouTube is significantly louder than everything else I have.
Some of the hope is that you can set your volume dial on your AV receiver to one place and leave it there, because
that's not going to be
if everybody adhered to reference volume, then it would all work out with granted, if everybody did, but everybody doesn't, so unfortunately no. One of the issues, and so this does apply to the way Apple releases their content within Apple TV. This is also something that unfortunately Disney has been doing a lot, even on their physical disc releases, which is that they have been remastering the home releases with a reference volume of 75 dB instead of 85. Which, of course, a 10 decibel difference, you're going to be like, hey, the disc is significantly louder if you didn't touch the volume dial on your AV receiver. So, I mean, Disney has explained it that, they say, most people say that, they don't want movie theater volumes, that they always listen quieter. Now, why they would assume that people want to have their volume on their AV receiver on their TV turned way up to compensate for them turning it down to like the end result of where they want it to be, I don't know. It's a weird logic that I don't agree with whatsoever, but unfortunately they've done it. So if you were to actually compare some of the Disney disc releases to the Apple TV version or the Disney Plus version, you might not find that volume difference, but from other studios that are adhering to the proper 85 dB reference volume and then comparing to that same movie released via Apple, you're going to notice that 10 decibel difference. So,
I wish I had heard all that.
That's the
explanation. I had to go blow my nose because that sounded very interesting. I caught the end of it.
You can
but
listen
I was
to the
like,
podcast still.
I'm not gonna, but I could. You're right. That's a good theory. So as far as comparing the video quality, he didn't notice as much of a difference as he anticipated. To be totally honest, a lot of the time he couldn't tell them apart. He expected a bigger difference because he's read a lot of the takes online that always say physical discs are so much better. But honestly, is that really true? He's debating what is the best way to continue building his movie collection moving forward. One big plus for Apple Movies is that most of what he bought in HD quality was upgraded to 4K for free. That didn't happen to his 1080p Blu-ray, so what do we think? You know what? I'm going to be honest with you. Most of the time when I have the if I own the disc, but it is on Disney Plus,
sure,
I just stream it from Disney Plus.
Yes, convenience definitely is there. Yep.
We've said that multiple times. So are there differences? Probably. and it depends. It depends heavily on your ability. What your internet speeds are as well. There's almost certainly differences, but the thing that I think that, if anything, we have learned in the last couple of years is that if you buy the disc, at the very least, George Lucas can't come along and change it again.
And if a licensing agreement runs out, it won't disappear from your library when you have the physical disc.
Yes. Well, I mean, the other day I wanted to, and this was a while ago, I wanted to watch Cabin in the Woods. It was on Netflix, and then it was on Hulu, and then it was gone. So I wanted to watch Cabin in the Woods, which I love that movie. Yeah. So I tried to find some place. I couldn't stream it. So I went and bought the disc, but now it's back on Netflix. Sure. So, they come and they go. You never really know, but, there is some benefit. So, that the quality is going to be the quality that it is when it's on a disc. The audio is going to be the audio it's going to be when it's on a disc. The version that you buy is the version that's going to be on the disc. I still have the VHS version of the original Star Wars trilogy that is completely unaltered by all the changes, and I've kept it even though I don't have a VHS player. I've kept it because I know at least I own that, and that they can't take those versions away from me. But there is a lot of advantages to streaming things online, and if you don't care that much about a specific movie or whatever, don't buy it.
Well, and I mean, he's also talking about he is purchasing movies, but through Apple. I don't. Was Apple, it any more movies? I guess it's not iTunes anymore. But whatever, but purchasing that, so that he's not just streaming it from a subscription service. He is purchasing it. So he's like, moving forward, do I continue buying physical discs, or do I just go to Apple Movies and buy the downloadable or version there? My recommendation would be, unless the price gap is egregious, it's still the case that if you buy the physical disc, you usually still get a code that you can go to iTunes and have that version too. So it's almost like getting both in one. And that way, if there is, let's say there's an 8K version and Apple decides to upgrade everybody's 4K versions to 8K for free, well, you got both. You still have the physical disc and you got the free digital upgrade, through Apple. So it's kind of best of both worlds, in my opinion. So for that reason alone, I would continue to buy physical discs as long as they're still available, because you don't lose in any way, unless, like I say, there's an egregious price difference. Over at HD TV Test, Vincent Teo did an interesting second. I mean, if anybody is pixel peeping and looking for the most minute details that nobody else might ever see, it's that man. And it was kind of funny because he was specifically talking about, okay, what if the streaming version or the Apple version is Dolby Vision and the physical disc is HDR10 only? Because we've actually seen that a whole bunch, where the only way to get the Dolby Vision version is via the streaming service and the physical disc is HDR10 only. So he was specifically looking at that, but pointed out all the other differences too. So in terms of seeing any artifacts, macro blocking in shadows, banding in, a bright blue sky, those types of things, you didn't have that on the discs by and large, unless there was an error when they were making it. Whereas you do still occasionally get some of those things in the streaming version. So from that point of view, the discs are superior. However, that is going to continue to improve. We're going to get better compression codecs, and we're going to get greater internet streaming bandwidth, and that stuff will continue to improve over time. And I mean, even he, a very critical person, even more critical than Tom and I, was like, yeah, it's getting darn close. And in many instances, he was like, when you can get the Dolby Vision version on streaming and HDR10 only on disc, he preferred the Dolby Vision version because there were, from scene to scene, it was more consistent in its brightness from scene to scene. And I'm like, yeah, for someone that critical to be like, I might opt for the streaming version. I'm like, oh, okay, we're getting there. We're really, really getting there. So, yeah, I say put it all.
You got to remember, it was like, 10 years ago where people were like, we'll never be able to stream HD. It'll never be good enough to stream HD, and here we are with 4K going. I don't know. I can kind of tell the difference. I think.
So I mean, maybe. Personally, if the price difference isn't big, I would get the disc because, like I say, you're not losing. You get the digital version of it too. So get them both. That's great. But yeah, if you're like, hey, this version is easily available on Apple, and it's going to be more expensive or tough to track down on disc, I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't feel bad about expanding my Apple movie collection. The quality is pretty darn good now.
Yeah. So the only real fear, and we have to say this, is that the service could go away someday.
Indeed.
As much as Apple seems like it's never going anywhere, and they're rich enough to buy Disney or whatever they are.
Yeah.
it doesn't take. We've all seen it happen before.
Sure.
Some company is the top of the world, and then something happens. They have some sort of weird Enron-like accounting scandal, and next thing you know, they're dissolved. Or the EU and the United States gets together and decides that they're going to break them apart into different.
Well, there's also the thing of people who have moved countries have discovered that when they log into their Apple account from the new country that they're living in, they don't have access to the entire library that they purchased. I mean, they purchased it outright, and they can't get to their movies because of country differences, and they have to go through a VPN, and then your bandwidth might not be high enough to stream the highest quality, and all kinds of weird stuff. So again, you get the physical disc as long as you have a
there are considerations.
Yes,
there are considerations that if you buy the disc, you have the disc.
Right.
I mean, that can't be taken away from you. You may have to buy a player that's like region free or something like that, but you have the disc. So,
and you redeem the code
for most
so you
of
have
us.
both.
Yeah. Peter in Sweden. Peter has a bone to pick. It's not my fault, it's Rob's.
Yeah.
He's a big fan of the Home Theater Guru on YouTube, and he is a particular fan of his guide to using the UMic 1 Room EQ Wizard and Mini DSP to set up subs. Peter has taken the advice to heart that the subwoofer crawl is not a good way to set up a single subwoofer, and that a UMic 1 with Room EQ Wizard is infinitely better. Infinitely. The sideways
one bad, the other one good.
Yes. One burn with fire, the other one marry it. Put a ring on it. Peter also followed Home Theater Guru's suggested method for setting up multiple subwoofers using Room EQ Wizard and the Mini DSP, and the results were a game changer to him. So, to his mind, this is the only way we should recommend setting up subwoofers. He cringes now when we suggest anyone do the subwoofer crawl, and Rob's 12-step guide isn't anywhere near as good as this UMic 1 plus Room EQ Wizard and Mini DSP method. Compared to what people are paying for their subs, it's a really cheap investment. I would argue with that, but let's go on. So, why would we continue to recommend anything else? Why aren't we touting this method more highly? Because it's free.
There's that.
That's why.
And there's a fair amount of, I will say, understandable misunderstanding. So I'm sure Tom didn't watch the 1 hour and 45-minute video that went through this. Plus, to really get the whole picture. So, I mean, first of all, my take on Home Theater Guru, I don't mind that guy. I think the advice that he gives is pretty darn spot on. Now, he's a little bit similar to us, where it's almost like a bit of a conversation, right? As you go, you kind of have to go through all the videos in order. He'll reference back to things that he did before. And there's a little bit of, this was question of me, so here's my take on that. And, it like things evolve as you go through his videos. It's not like he sat down and meticulously wrote out a script for everyone, right? He's going through them the way that he does things, and he's pretty darn spot on. So there are way worse places to get your advice. This is, in fact, a good place to get your advice, and I want to put that right out there. I don't have any big criticism of what is being described on Home Theater Guru. Now, I think what he because he is not a fan of the subwoofer crawl, and that's fine. And it is the same thing we have said, which is that if you Google how to do a subwoofer crawl and you read almost any description that is written online, the way they say to do it is terrible. And him saying...
Not AV gadgets, I'll say that much.
But, I mean, we've both seen it, right? And he talks about how, they say put on some bass-heavy music, and maybe for the 3 notes that song is playing, things sound good, but you don't know what it's doing over the rest of the frequency. We're like, yeah, exactly. That's why we always say you gotta go get a bass sweep and play a full bass sweep on repeat. You can't just put on some bass-heavy music. But criticizing that, this is the way they always say to do a subwoofer crawl, I'm like, yeah, he's not wrong about that. We've said the very same thing. So for Peter specifically talking about us and us recommending doing a subwoofer crawl, we don't always go through every single step every single time because we've got a lot of questions to get through. And yes, sometimes we cut it short. But I will absolutely defend us saying that, no, we have never said just play some bass-heavy music or put on your favorite song that has some bass in it.
This podcast has been going on for 13
Absolutely.
years. We have definitely said that. So we have not said that recently.
Okay.
That's for sure. We have said it. You can
recently,
find an episode where I have said that.
Play a full bass sweep on repeat. So that's one little detail about it. Now, the other part is what Home Theater Guru is describing, and he calls himself Home Theater Guru, not single person in a single seat guru. So he is focusing on the same thing that we tend to focus on, which is more than one seat. most of the time that we have ever talked about doing a subwoofer crawl, we've done a fairly decent job of saying this is one sub for one seat. We don't want to do this if you care about having uniform response in multiple seats, and the only way you're going to tackle that is with more than one subwoofer. Home Theater Guru and we are in complete agreement there. There is no conflict in what we're recommending there. Right. He's just gone to the point of saying, don't do the subwoofer crawl, full stop. And honestly, I'm kind of fine with that advice, because if you're trying to give advice that fits as many people as possible, just saying, don't even mess with them. Like, I'm okay with someone coming to that conclusion. However, we do see usefulness in the subwoofer crawl, which is when somebody is saying, I really only care about one seat, and I really only have these 3 or 4 places where my subwoofer can possibly live in this room. Should I put it here or here or here? That is when we will say, if you do a subwoofer crawl, you're going to find out that one of those positions, the bass sweep when you play it sounds like an absolute roller coaster. Don't put your subwoofer there. I don't think Home Theater Guru would disagree with our advice on that one, because he's trying to optimize for a large seating area with at least 2 subwoofers, all of which is stuff that we love. But the idea that there is never a place for the subwoofer crawl, it comes with a whole bunch of caveats. When he says the subwoofer crawl as a method of optimizing your bass in a room is very flawed, we completely agree. It is not. Yeah. And he also references, and we have seen these articles where the headline is the best way to set up your subwoofer, and then they describe a subwoofer crawl. No, it is not the best way. It is one tool in the toolbox that sometimes applies, and it has a whole bunch of caveats with it. So that's my defense, Peter, and it's why we will still suggest to some people in some scenarios that a subwoofer crawl could be useful to them, because some people are like, I bought a $150 sub, I only care about one seat, and I've only got 3 places where it can live. I'm not going to tell them to spend $100 on a UMic 1 and 3 hours going through multiple measurements when they can do a subwoofer crawl, and it'll get them pretty much where they need to be.
We're ignoring the I guess the elephant in the room in my mind, which is, you got to kind of reach people where they live. Yes. And not only will the cost make people stop listening to you, but the everything else involved with it. I remember, so I'm a member of Toastmasters, which is I hope most of you know what it is. It's a group that, international group that meets usually once a week to practice social speaking in public speaking. And, a lot of the work I did before COVID was public speaking. So it was just a good way to keep the tools honed and everything else. So I did a presentation one time on the subwoofer crawl. Not just a subwoofer crawl, but placing a subwoofer in your home theater. First of all, almost nobody in the room knew what a subwoofer was. Second of all, when I suggested that you put it on your chair, everybody lost their minds. Like, nobody could understand what the heck I was talking about. But once I got through the whole process, I'm like, okay, well, that sounds pretty reasonable. Now add, $400 to that and 3 hours of your life, or however much it's going to cost.
It wouldn't be $400. It'd be $100 for the UMic. Room EQ Wizard is free, but there's the time involvement.
But the mini, you need the mini DSP as well.
Well, to actually tune anything, yes.
Right. So, we're back up to $300. Yeah, so $300 and 3 hours of your life. And when you spend $150 on a subwoofer,
right? Exactly.
It's just not something that's reasonable. So it's like when you can pick any hobby, pick whatever your favorite hobby is, right? And from vast experience that when that new person comes into that hobby and you start talking to them about the hobby, you can't immediately go to buy the best gear, buy the best shoes, spend all this money on this stuff, because they won't do it. They're not interested. They're not there yet. They have to get there themselves. And we get them there by getting them through the subwoofer crawl, and then when they say, but it's good here, but now it's not good everywhere else. And then we start talking about a second subwoofer. Like, yeah, but I want it even better. Then you start talking about Room EQ Wizard and
there's
DSPs,
a progression for sure. Yeah, I can see where Peter is coming from. At the same time, this is something that's been noodling on my mind for a few weeks, which was like, why is there something about okay, I'm gonna end up saying the name again, but Audio Science Review. Like, why is there something about it that bugs me on some kind of emotional level? I was having trouble putting my finger on it, and I mean, I should have come to it sooner because it's something that Tom mentions frequently, and it's the same reason why, as awesome as a huge amount of the information on AVS forum is, why there something about it is distasteful, and it's gatekeeping. Gatekeeping is the thing that Tom and I hate the most, perhaps, in this entire hobby. We hate...
It's one thing I refuse to do.
Yeah.
I refuse to do it.
We loathe gatekeeping and this idea that, like, I don't... So, I mean, what's funny is Peter said, you know, like as far as he's concerned, he went through this process, had great results. I'm not surprised. It's a good method. It's essentially the Earl Getty's method is what he's describing. Yeah. That's his method of setting up these subwoofers. I'm like, but... Like, I'm sure Home Theater Guru, if they haven't done it already, I'm sure he will. He didn't do the multi-sub optimizer, which automates a fair amount of this and gets into the whole thing of individual EQ applied to each sub, which he hasn't gotten to yet, at least not in the videos that Peter was referencing. And I was like, oh, so there's more. So this idea of like, oh, this is the absolute best method. I'm like, part of why it worked so well in Home Theater Guru's setup is because he did all the other things too. He built a rectangular room. He put 4 subwoofers, 1 in each corner. I'm like, that did a tremendous amount of the work for you before you had to, and that this was like fine tuning. And, you know, it was a fairly quick iterative process that he had to go through.
Any all or none statement is going to rub me the wrong way. That's just all there is to it.
I don't want anyone to think that is the way Home Theater Guru is presenting any of this, or that is the way that Peter thinks of this. I don't want to misrepresent anybody of that, but he asked the question of like, you know, why don't we, when somebody says, how do I set up my subwoofer? Why isn't this our go-to? Right? Coming at it from that perspective, I'm like, because some people are right at the beginning of their home theater journey. Yeah. And this, if we're going to tell them this is the way to do it, I don't disagree that this is a good way to do it. I just disagree with the idea that it's the only way to do it.
Right. So I went cycling with a friend of mine. One of the he's actually the next door neighbor of the guy that got me into cycling, and he's really into cycling. I mean, and he's got a lot of money. He's not like uber rich or anything, but you know, he doesn't, purchasing something he doesn't have to go and check the bank account to make sure that he's got the money for it. So, you know, I went cycling with him the other day, and you know, we were just kind of cycling around, and you know, kind of a short ride, and then we stopped for coffee. And I didn't bring any money with me, so I'll buy you a cup of coffee. I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. It's $5 or whatever. So we sat down and we started looking at our bikes and talking about bikes, because that's what cyclers do. And he's like, "Oh man, I got this watch. It does all the stuff." Strava is this app that, if you don't know what it is, if you're an exercise person, it's like this all-inclusive app that does cycling, running, swimming. It records your laps and your heart rate. It can do all these things. And he's like, "Oh, you've got this watch here. It's usually $250, but it's like $90 on the Amazon right now, and you know, it does all your Strava stuff for you." I'm like, "Yeah, well, I've got a phone, does it too, so I don't need that." And he's like, "Oh, well, you know, and then if you get these things right here that you attach to your pedals or your cranks or whatever, you know, it'll record your cadence. You put this thing up front, and that's only about $50 for those two things. And then, you know, you could get this and get this. And by the end of all these little things that I needed to get, I was like $350, $400 in the hole. And I'm like, dude, I'm not buying any of this stuff. You do realize that my bike's a piece of garbage compared to your, you know, $9,000 full carbon fiber bike. I'm not buying that for this bike. This is a $500 bike, and you want me to spend $350 just on gadgets to put on it to tell me how fast or how much electricity I'm generating or whatever it is. I'm like, I'm not there yet.
Sure.
And while he's not telling me I have to do it, you know, it feels that way. So when somebody comes to this podcast and asks a question, I want to meet them where they live. Right. If they come here and say, "Hey, I've been watching this stuff about mini DSPs and I really want to dial in," well, then let's talk about that. Or I bought a subwoofer. How do I set it up? We're not going to, you know, block off a Saturday and order all this stuff from Amazon, because this is going to take you all day, because they're just going to shut down and say,
they might get to that point. They might not. I had to laugh a bit at the my 12-step guide thing, because I'm like, actually, what's really funny is the particular video that Peter recommended, which is episode 7, which is like, I think Home Theater Guru's most popular video, because it was like, It's super useful. Like he actually showed like the button clicks, what you're clicking in Room EQ Wizard, and like that's really useful because we haven't done a tutorial video like that, and that is a super wonderful resource to have for somebody who's like, okay, that's fine to tell me this is what I need to measure, but what do I actually click to make that happen? Like, that's great that he went through it. Wonderful.
Right.
But what I had to laugh at it because I was like, well, actually, the method of like trial and error, adjusting the delay in the mini DSP of each subwoofer individually until you get the uniform response, and then applying a single EQ at the end of all of that. I was like, that's exactly what my 12-step guide to do says to do, except I'm using fully variable phase on the subwoofer itself and ears only. And I mean, one of the other comments that he made, which is true, he was like, the reason you want to get into measuring it and seeing it like this is because you can have a dip in your response, and even if you're playing a bass sweep and listening to it, you don't really notice it. It can be tough in a sweep to notice how much something is different. But my response to that is, but let's think about that for a second. If you can't notice it. Like I completely agree that this is a great method. There are even methods more advanced than this, Peter. So who knows what rabbit hole you're going to find yourself falling into now. But, if you can't hear it, and it's more of a, yes, I can see it, and that's great that now I know it's even more accurate than what my ears were revealing to me. But let's bring that back for a second and be like, okay, if we can't hear it, then there's that side too.
So lastly, he asked, why are 6-inch thick bass traps suggested as being any sort of help for bass issues in a room? They don't have any impact on 30, 40, 50-foot wavelengths, which will be the lowest bass. Once again, tuning things up via Room EQ Wizard and the Mini DSP made a way bigger difference in Peter's experience. It's because we never said that they were going to have any effect on the super low bass like that. They are effective down to about 250 hertz.
Yeah, very effective.
Maybe a little bit lower.
And some of the corner bass traps, like they have an effect as low as 80 hertz, not as much as they're affecting up at 200 and 250 hertz, but some effect that low. But like they're your regular 2-inch panels that you might see are doing nothing.
Well, if you look on, in fact, if you look on AV Gadgets, or so, should I put foam in my home theater, and I compared the absorption coefficients from foam versus regular rigid fiberglass. Fiberglass panels or Rockwell panels, and you can see how they are fairly efficient down to 250 hertz. Where that is, I hate to say it, man, that's a whole bunch of the frequency response. You're talking not that much left from 20 kilohertz down to 250 hertz.
If it's vocals that's that you're caring about.
Yeah. So it does a lot, and bass starts. It doesn't start at 80 hertz.
Heavens no, that is low bass.
That is extremely low. So yes, they do have an effect on bass. No, they don't have an effect at the lowest bass. But then again, we never said that you shouldn't have room correction, which is essentially what you're talking about. In fact, I am all about the room correction, and that's where the room correction does have the most effect, which is in that very, very, very low
I mean, I think what's happened here, I mean, this is just supposition on my part, but I think what's happened a little bit here is that we say a lot of the same terms that you will read elsewhere online, where we criticize how we see it portrayed online all the time. But we use the same terms because, I mean, you can't get away from the name of the thing. And I think I'm completely speculating here, but just the way that Peter's questions came in, it seemed a bit like he hears us say that phrase and maybe tunes out at that point a little bit, where it's like, oh, they're talking about that thing that I've seen elsewhere that Home Theater Guru has debunked. And it's like, we vastly agree with Home Theater Guru far more than we disagree. Okay, so I think there's a little bit of a communication or a misinterpretation going on there. But one of the things I did find interesting, because Home Theater Guru has a whole thing on okay, great, you've tuned up your subwoofers. Now, how do you get them to integrate with your speakers? Because sometimes in that crossover region, it can get darn tricky. And he has a cool method, actually, that I haven't utilized a lot, which is this idea that once you tune the subwoofers, then you get things with the speakers. The speaker distance setting is going to be the same as a tape measure, because that's high frequencies and the directional, but that you can adjust the distance setting or the delay setting on the subwoofer signal, right? We're not dealing with individual subs anymore and getting them to sum. We're talking about that distance setting in your AV receiver for your single mono subwoofer output that is then feeding all four of your subwoofers. That if you do some trial and error with that, it's you can start to, if you have an unwanted dip right at 80 hertz or something like that, you can ameliorate some of that sometimes. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. That's worth playing with sometimes. But one of the reasons we recommend bass traps and corner bass traps is because they can have an effect down to 80 hertz there. And they can mechanically and acoustically start to address some of those same issues that you can't address 100% electronically. The other thing is, like Home Theater Guru is stuck to, okay, let's get your front speakers matched up with your subs really well. You can only change that distance setting on the subwoofer output to one value. What happens with the 13 other speakers if you've got a 9.1? Like, all of your speakers aren't necessarily going to mesh perfectly, right? So the idea is that, okay, if we want all of them to have this flat line in that crossover region, we really have to treat the room. So it's to help us with the crossover region. That's mostly what we're doing when we're talking about corner bass traps. That's basically the answer.
All right. Chris appreciated our take on audio science reviews, speaker reviews. It's too many reviews in one sentence. And he noted that Aaron over at Aaron's Audio Corner, whoever that is, now has the same approximately $100,000 Klippel measurement system that Amir uses. Chris doesn't expect us to explain all the math that's involved.
And I wouldn't be able to.
Of it. Yeah. But what are our general thoughts? Even though it's an expensive rig with a robotic arm and the software to crunch the numbers, it's still a lot less than building a full anechoic chamber. So Chris just wanted to better understand this Klippel speaker measurement system and what we think of it. I mean, the idea here is it's got a little microphone that spins around the thing and
very precisely so that it's repeatable.
And the idea with any of these systems, and in fact, when I took measurements in a room, you're trying to take the measurement and then using math, correct your measurement to factor out the effects of the room. And you do that by taking multiple measurements from multiple different angles and blah, 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 blah. How effective is it? I mean, it's $100,000 effective. It's way more effective than it would be if you hadn't spent $100,000 on it. And to me, it's like anything else. I mean, you look at it, you get a sense of what it means to you, what it means how the reviewer interprets it, and then you compare it to other measurements that are similar. The fact is that there's just not that many measurements that are similar. If you're not looking at something like an anechoic measurement, that's going to be provided for you almost certainly by the manufacturer, and then you have to worry about how they smoothed it and everything else. So
the methodology for what is being done here is perfectly sound. So, I mean, the basic idea of this Klippel system is that it takes so pick yourself a sphere of a given radius, and it takes all its measurements in that sphere, and then you pick a larger radius sphere, and it does the measurements again, but now in a larger radius sphere. And in fact, if you want the best results, you would do that as many times as you can in ever-increasing sizes of spheres. And that way, so if we're talking about you put the microphone really close to the tweeter and you play a 10 kilohertz sound, I mean, there you can just stop the measurement after a very short amount of time so that the sound wave literally did not have time to make it to any reflective surface and then back to the microphone. Because the wavelengths are short enough at those very high frequencies that they can just go from the driver to the microphone. You can stop the measurement in time before the reflection reaches the microphone, and therefore you're getting only the direct sound. That totally works. But as you go lower and lower in frequency, it becomes more and more difficult and then eventually impossible to do that, because literally the wave didn't make it to the microphone before it reflected off of something and made its way back. So the Klippel system, when you're getting lower into those lower frequencies, by having these at least two spheres of different radiuses or perhaps multiple spheres, because it's moving this robotic arm and knows exactly where that microphone was placed relative to each measurement, now you can start to calculate by the phase differences in those two measurements. Okay, we know the sound source was the same. We know exactly where the microphone was placed. So this phase difference must be due to a reflection that made its way back to the microphone. And that's how it gets, like, trying to do that by hand would take you hours, if not days. And so that's why it makes sense to have a computer that can crunch these numbers for you. Perfectly sound reasoning. Now, the issue is that it's still a robot So even though it's much more precise than your hand moving the microphone around, it is not 100% precise. You do have to still calibrate it. You do have to make sure that it's oiled properly. Like literally that can come into play, because if there's any discrepancy, there's still a tolerance. There's still a plus minus on every measurement that's taken. As Amir has described at Audio Science Review, where you begin the measurement vertically on the speaker, because most speakers we're dealing with, more than one driver, and where you begin that measurement in terms of vertical placement of the microphone to the drivers can have a difference on the end results, and that ultimately you'd want to run, like he runs 2,000 measurements, still not enough. Right? You'd still want to get even more to get really, really great accuracy. So, it's sound. Not everybody is going to spend $1 million to build an anechoic chamber. It is certainly a better method than just sticking a microphone and taking one measurement. There you go.
Right, and then having somebody who knows what they're talking about looking at the measurement and saying, okay, this is probably the room. This is probably a floor bounce. This is probably a ceiling bounce. That sort of thing. You get a lot of that in these reviews. That's why, there is something to be said for, subjective only reviews.
Sure.
You get a description of the room, you get a description of where the person sat in relation to them, how much room treatment there is in there, and then you say, is this like my room? Because if this is like my room, if this sounds similar to my room, then I will have a similar. At least then I know that we're dealing with an apples to apples comparison, or I can expect a similar experience.
Well, I like the idea that more people are going to get this and post measurements of the same speaker, because we want that peer review. We want to say because you can have an error. I mean, if you took 2,000 measurements, but every single one of those measurements had an error in it, you're going to have great consistency and precision, but not good actual accuracy. We want to be able to compare to other people. And I don't expect someone to spend the rest of their life measuring one speaker over and over again to do their own peer review, the more people who can do this, great.
Right. I agree. His sister has the Denon S530 entry-level receiver. It comes with a little microphone, and the manual says it has auto setup. But this is an Odyssey. It only describes putting the mic at the main listening position, nowhere else. Can we describe what it is actually doing to the signal? Is it worth using? Perhaps it is useful for just setting speaker distances and levels, but not equalization. Can the EQ be manually turned off afterwards while keeping the distance and level settings? It is almost certainly. I mean, I don't know what the S530 is doing exactly, but if it does have, speaker distance and levels and stuff like that, that is a no-brainer. Even the Onkyo's are doing it with their Accu EQ.
This
garbage,
is about equal to the Onkyo Accu EQ.
So it's going to do if it does have an EQ setting. Which I'm sure
it does,
which it may or may not do.
Doesn't
but there's
see
almost
it.
I have yet seen an EQ that could not be defeated. Yeah. But so I would run it and then listen to it and then turn the EQ off and listen to it again and then make a decision.
Yep, that's pretty much it. Yeah, the distances and levels, it's totally fine to use it for that. It will apply a little EQ that it doesn't let you see or change. But, and again, I don't begrudge anybody who didn't find this because it's not in the speaker settings. You have to go to you bring up the menu for settings, and then you go to the audio section, and under there is a room EQ on or off. And that is where you can turn it off after the fact. But it's not in the in with the rest of all of your speaker settings and amplifier setup and all of that where you would think to look. So
it's a Denon. They're going to hide it. Right. They're going to hide it someplace. Denon has a long and storied history of having absolutely incomprehensible menus, and they'll be damned if they're not going to continue that going forward.
But I would,
no matter how good they get, there's always going to be something that you're going to go, really, dude, we needed this here. This is where this went.
I would say much like Accu EQ, I had no problem using it for distances and levels. It'll get those just fine, and then I would turn off the EQ. I absolutely would.
Yeah. Steve. Last weekend, Steve watched the new 4K Ultra HD version of District 9 with his wife. In one scene with a bunch of helicopters, Steve got all excited because he really noticed his overhead Atmos speakers. He remarked on it to his wife, to which she replied, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
She wasn't exactly matching his level of excitement, so he skipped back, because you know what? Explaining the joke always makes the joke funnier. So he skipped back and played the scene again. He said, "See what I mean?" And she said, "Not really."
Yeah.
So they've had discussions about surround sound and Atmos. He said how he wants to upgrade the living room system to a surround sound, but Steve's wife isn't on board. I can already hear the TV just fine, can't you? Is what she says. It's hardly a stretch to say that there's always seems to be more men than women by a large margin anywhere that home theater is being discussed. But why? Why is the excitement about home theater gear and setting up speakers and surround sound effects and all of that so male dominated? Well, I mean, I don't think it has to be. I don't think that. I don't
think it's inaccurate to say that there are more.
It's not inaccurate. You're right. So, are there reasons why this is the case? Biological reasons? I don't know. I mean, you could say that. I think there's been tests that men generally have better spatial, whatever they call that, spatial reasoning, spatial stuff, than whatever. I think like the sense of direction, like women gets lost more often than men or something. I don't know. I don't necessarily put much stock into many of these sort of old wives' tales. I
kind of wonder,
things.
like along those lines, of like pure supposition, but like the whole thing of if we go back, sometime, like traditionally the men were the hunters that left the tribal camp and went out and hunted. And I wonder if there was some evolutionary thing to being more attuned to pinpoint precise sound while you're out there hunting or avoiding a predator versus if you were more likely staying at home most of the time, if there was any evolution to that, but no idea.
I mean, there could be any thousands of numbers of reasons why, because I know plenty of women that are very interested in home theater, or at least interested in movies, and there's no reason why they wouldn't be excited by home theater.
I mean, movies and music,
I think
that's a pretty even split. If you look at ticket sales and all that, like that's an even split. But I mean, certainly by our experience, we can't deny that. I mean, look at the number of men who write to us versus women, if that's one thing.
I hate to break it to you, man, but dudes, I think you got to look at yourselves and say, how come more women aren't in this hobby? And that's because a lot of guys, just like in the comic book world and in the video game world, they're gatekeepers, man. They will absolutely.
Yeah, there's definitely a boys' club thing going on with it, so that doesn't help.
And if you don't feel welcome someplace, are you going to keep trying to hang out there? I mean, most people would say no. So the fact that a woman asks a question on this podcast, and I, maybe in my ignorance, just remark, "Oh, it's a woman. Yay." Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. It's probably not as welcoming as it should be. I think that there's no absolute reason why we shouldn't have just as many women interested in this hobby as everybody else.
It is a puzzling question, though. But I mean, there are multiple fields, and I mean, some of it. I mean, it does just seem like certain things. There are more like okay, let's take guns, right? It just seems to be like, I remember one person was saying like they were like the most liberal, don't want any guns whatsoever, and it's like their son, just like everything he picked up, he turned into a gun when he played with it. Like, and he had been actively discouraged to do so, and it was just like everything he picked up, a stick, a rock, everything became a gun in his hand when he was like 3 years old, and it's like, why is that the case? But we see a lot of boys do that, and we see some girls do it, but probably fewer. Just anecdotally, that seems to be the case. It's tough to say why. We're not, what is it? What is that? Is that anthropology? What is that? I don't know what that is, that field of study. Whatever it is, we're not it. We don't have the answer. I don't know.
I think though, from if we want to take a lesson from this, or that we should in our own minds try to remember going forward, is that inclusiveness is always beneficial. Steve's seeing that right now, right? Because Steve is trying to get his wife excited about a thing, and she's just like, I don't get it. Like, I gave up on my wife. Like, she just she didn't care about the surround. She doesn't care about anything. And then one day she came to me and she said, I am so glad we have a home theater. Yeah. I was like, what? I thought you hated that room. She's like, oh, it's so nice not having a TV. TV is in other parts of the house. We have a TV room that we all go into, and then we close the door, and then the rest of the house is for everything else, and I love that.
But see, like, her excitement wasn't about you adding your Atmos speakers. Like, that wasn't the thing that she appreciated about the theater.
I don't think she knows that they're up there.
Like, if you had just 2 speakers in the theater, I think she would still love that you have the theater
room.
So, I mean, we're like, 11 speakers, 4 subwoofers, separate amplifiers. Like, we don't see as many women getting excited about that. We see some. It's not all or nothing, but we don't see as many women getting excited about that facet of it.
But I think that there's no reason why they couldn't be.
Yeah.
And it just depends on, how much we're going to gatekeep or not gatekeep, and to make sure that people are welcomed into this community.
For any area of interest, though, I don't think trying to push it on people works either, because
it never I mean,
there must be things that your wife is into that you're not, and if all she did was try to push it on you and get you as excited about it as she is, that wouldn't work either. So
yeah. Wait a second. I have to scroll. I'm still on Steve. JR. Now that he has his pair of PC2000 Pro subs, JR has discovered new rattles and resonances in his room. He continues to measure with Room EQ Wizard, so he knows he has a significant output. He has a significant output down to 16 hertz now. Jesus. That'll rattle something. One rattle in particular is the access hatch to his crawl space. It's just a 3/4 inch piece of plywood that is kept in place with 2 magnetic latches. How could that go wrong? If he holds his hand against the plywood at the top of the frame, that pretty much eliminates the unwanted noise. So what do we suggest as a way to damp that crawl space hatch? He doesn't need to get in there very often, but he does need it to remain accessible. I am unclear of what he is talking about. It's a 3/4 inch piece of plywood that's kept in place with 2 magnetic latches.
Yeah, well, like imagine you've got a hatch into your crawl space. It's got like a hinge on it, so when you close it, there's the magnetic latches that hold it closed. But when his bass plays now down to 16 hertz, it rattles, which shock of shocks.
Well, I mean, it depends on how thick those magnets are there, but I would try to put some sort of just a little bit of damping material, like right around that the frame, I guess, where it closes.
What is that rubber tape that you use all around your place?
Yeah, rubber insulation tape.
Insulation
tape.
Okay.
Yeah. I've got a link for it someplace.
Okay. Now I would suggest, because I mean, he says he still needs to get in there, but not very often. So I might say museum putty. Because that would work.
Yeah, but that's sticky,
but it's real sticky. Like, it won't mar the finish of anything, because that's the whole point of museum putty, is that you can remove. But, like, it could be more difficult to reopen that hatch than you might imagine just from putty. Certainly if you, like, literally put it all the way around the perimeter, you might have a real tough time getting that hatch back open.
No. Yeah, you can actually see, if you look on Amazon on some of those museum putty things, that people put them like on their glass or their vases and stuff like that, or any sort of glass figurines, so their cats don't knock them over. And then you'll see pictures of the top of the vase broken off, the cat broke it off, but the bottom stayed there. You're like, well, I guess it worked.
It's pretty darn close to glue. So what I could probably recommend more highly is something similar, but blue tack. Blue tack, again, is this malleable, sticky putty, but it's not quite as strong as museum putty. It's easier to remove. So, I mean, and again, you put just a few blobs in specific parts around. That's going to act as damping. It's going to keep the hatch shut, but it's not going to cure. And when you open it, you're going to have these blobs of blue tack there. But if you're only going in there once a year or something, then that's fine, and then you just replace the blue tack.
Yeah. It's really, you just need a little something. Like on my doors in my home theater, I have put this rubber insulation tape, and it wears out after some time. But who cares? I bought a roll of it,
and it's not super expensive.
15 years ago, I think, and I'm still working on it, so it's not going away.
Maybe a combo. You have a rubber insulation tape around the perimeter, and then a couple of blobs of blue tack.
Yeah, Dave from the Movie Chatter podcast. What is it with these people? And their podcasts coming on my podcast. We'll start charging.
I don't know. Maybe we're riding their coattails, Tom. I mean, actually, most podcasts have more listeners than we do, so it very well might be that direction.
All right, Dave, send some listeners. That's the charge.
That's right.
Send some listeners. Last week, we talked about inexpensive subwoofer options for Dave's podcasting room. It's only 10 feet by 11 feet, and it's fully enclosed. Now he'd like a projector suggestion. He's currently using a Panasonic AX200, and it's time for an upgrade. He knows it'll sound crazy to say, but he wants a 120-inch screen in such a small room. But part of what he wants and needs is pixel peeping so that he can really scrutinize images. So that's a big part of the unusually large screen size for the room. He thought he had settled on the Epson 5050. That would be the top of his price range, but the throw distance won't work. So what projector model can we suggest at the same price or lower with a short enough throw distance and performance that comes as close as possible? Sitting closer to a direct view TV.
I mean, there is that. You got 83-inch OLEDs that are going to be available, although not at $3,000.
Right. But you can get like a 75-inch
yes.
or a 77-inch or something like that and just not sit on the back wall. I mean, just sit closer to it. And this, to me, I wouldn't put a projector in here if you paid me. Okay. I just wouldn't. I would get a direct view TV and I would just sit closer to it.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, like a 77-inch OLED, if you want to scrutinize an image, you can't get better. And then just sit a whole lot closer to it. But question as wrote, is there a solution now? It's kind of tough because I was like, the BenQ HT 5550 gets pretty reasonably close in picture quality. The price is basically the same. Would that work? No, its throw distance is too long too. So the BenQ HT 3550, which is only $1,500, that one would let you do this, just barely, but because it's not even a foot deep from front to back, that projector, if you put it right at the back of your 11-foot length and basically have a 10-foot throw distance, it can just reach I think 123 inches is the biggest it can get. It could just do this. Now, it is not the equal in picture quality to a 5050 UB. The black levels are not as deep. The contrast is not as good. The color range is not as wide. But if what you're worried most about is like seeing every pixel of 4K, it does that. It'll look better than your AX200, and the price certainly works. What I might recommend more highly, I don't know if this will work for you because you would need to buy a new screen too, is Optimus Cinema XP2, the ultra short throw model. Yeah,
that's what I was thinking too. But those are going to be, with the screen itself is going to take up a major part of the budget.
At least $800 if you're going with elite screens. And then actually for the 120-inch size, it's going to be more than that. So yeah, it's going to be over $1,000 just for the new screen. And then the projector itself is $3,300, which at least is pretty darn close to the $3,000 price point that we're working with. But I mean, at least that would get you the size in an amount of space that would work. There isn't much else. I was like, could JVC's DLP projectors work? No, throw range is too long.
I'm telling you, direct view is the way to go in this room. It really is.
I mean, you could certainly
I think you're hamstringing yourself by wanting a projector.
You don't have to go OLED with the 85-inch LCDs. Yeah. So
that's what I would do. Anonymous writes, how does Yamaha YPOW with RSC compare to Odyssey Multi-Q XT32? Pretty favorably. They're both pretty good. I like them both.
Yep.
I would be happy with either one. I've used them both, and I like them both. I like the YPOW stupid Nerf frisbee thing, Nerf boomerang thing that you put it on.
Yeah,
which is cool. I don't necessarily think that I experience much better results with one versus the other. But then again, I have my subs pretty optimally placed and lots of absorption in this room, so it's not having to do a ton. I like them both. My personal experience is that I would highly recommend either one.
Yeah. You have to be a little bit careful because you don't want to go with the non-RSC version, the one that doesn't have reflected sound control, because that means it's linear filters only, no fur filters. That's essentially what it means. The RSC is when they added fur filters, and you would not want to do any version that does not have multi-point, because if you're only measuring in one location, pretty useless. As long as you're getting the highest end version of YPOW that has multi-point and reflected sound control, it stacks up pretty darn favorably. And I like that they have YPOW volume, which is basically the same thing as Odyssey Dynamic EQ.
Right. All right, Dan. Dan is willing to admit he has a fear of change. You've definitely come to the wrong podcast, my friend. We're about to tell you to change something. All of his life, he's used tower speakers for his front, left, and right. He even went down the route of getting towers with self-powered bass drivers built in, using those as his subwoofers. He felt set in his ways and comfortable. But he started listening to us several years ago, and over time, wouldn't you know it, some of the stuff we say actually started to make some sense. He's got a 5.2.2 configuration now, and even though he still owns his power towers, he's got them set to small now, and he's wound up with 2 subs, one at the front of the room, one at the back. The bass is unquestionably better at this way, and there's no way he ever could have arranged the powered bass drivers in his towers in such a manner, not without cutting them off and putting them in the corners. So now he's been hearing us say for years that bookshelf front speakers make a whole lot of sense, and his own experience has him questioning, what's the point of floor standing tower speakers anyways? There's just the way they look, of course, and you could sort of think of them as already having stands built in, but now that he's ready for a speaker upgrade, he feels at a crossroad. He can't shake his desire for towers, but what do we say about bookshelf front speakers makes sense, or what we say about them makes sense? What is a man to do? Listen to us and reject the tower speakers.
The easiest argument is that you can get higher quality bookshelf speakers at the same price as lower quality towers.
You do have to factor in the fact that you will have to buy
Stands.
a stand, but stands almost universally are cheaper than the tower versions of the bookshelf speakers that you were going to buy. And I think that, to me, that is the biggest push. There's a lot of reasons to want a tower speaker, but there's very few reasons to actually own one. They look good. They're more stable than your bookshelf speakers on a stand. At least people feel that way.
It's harder
they do
to
have more
adjust
output.
The height of the tweeter, though.
Yeah, they do have. They do have. I swear, Rob, I just wrote this article the other day, and we're hitting all the points. In fact, you're saying things I've already written. That they do have. More output. Usually, they have more bass. And in the end, you don't need any of that. What you do need is something that crosses over just fine into 80 hertz, which is every bookshelf speaker in existence of any quality whatsoever.
But as we have mentioned, sometimes you'll run into a really high quality two-way speaker. But if you happen to be in a 10,000 foot great room, you need just raw output capability. You're in a 10,000 foot great room and you're sitting 20 feet away, right? Now, you just need raw output capability at least down to 80 hertz, and that two-way speaker just doesn't have it. Right? There are environmental considerations. There are seating distance considerations at some point. Because, like we said earlier, 80 hertz is that's not just bass, that's low bass. 250 hertz is bass. 500 hertz technically is where bass begins. We would call that upper bass at 500 hertz, but that's technically where it begins. So as you go into a larger and larger open volume of air, and you're sitting farther and farther away, and you're not getting reflection reinforcement from the room to help with any sort of volume consideration at those lower frequencies, sometimes you just need the raw output capability, and that's why towers still make sense, and we'll still recommend them to some people. But if you're in a moderately sized or a small room and you're sitting less than 15 feet away, which describes a lot of people's setup, then you're probably going to be better off in terms of the quality of the drivers and the build that you can get for the same amount of money from the bookshelf speaker.
And that should be so what do you care more about? An integrated stand, or how good your speakers sound? Because that's basically what you're trading off most of the time for tower speakers. Now, if you can find a deal, or
there's all that.
Someplace, all that stuff, fine. You can make the argument that you should buy one tower speaker over another bookshelf speaker. You can make that argument. It's just that all things being equal, you're going to get more quality, better sound out of a bookshelf speaker of a similar price point as a tower speaker. And to me, if you're in this hobby for a reason, it's because you care about sound, and that should be what dictates your purchasing decisions, not the fact that you've read online on AVS forums for decades that towers are always better than bookshelves, which is just not true. Chris asks, what is the minimum distance a port should have from a wall? And the SVS PC2000 cylinder sub in particular, how much space does that port need? Well, generally speaking, you can ask the manufacturer and they will tell you. Some ports need to be further away than others, depending on the design of the speaker, blah, blah, blah. But, 6 inches, a foot, around there, I guess would be what I would go for. But as a general rule, but yeah, 6 inches I think would be fine for most ports.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few speaker manufacturers say like the absolute bare minimum that they would have is like, I've never seen less than 3 inches. So if we're talking what is the absolute bare minimum, I've never really seen them say less than 3 inches, as far as just otherwise you're really going to start to run into potential audible issues. But I've also
boundary reinforcement.
I've also never really seen them recommend 3 inches. Like usually the recommendation is at least 6 inches to a foot. A lot of them will say ideally you'd have like 18 inches between any side of the speaker and any given wall in an absolutely ideal setup. So what's the absolute minimum is going to be about 3 inches. I mean, a good example is if you look at some of the subwoofers out there that have downward firing ports, they just have feet, and those feet are sometimes only about 1.5 inches, but it was designed with the idea that some of what you hear will be that port interaction with the floor. So with a subwoofer like the PC2000 that was not designed to fire into the floor, it's port into the floor, they're going to tell you that the bare minimum is going to be 3 inches.
Yeah. The only exception to those would be occasionally, like I think even SVS's prime satellites, they're like, yeah, you can shove those things around the wall, nobody cares.
Well, because already the base output capability is so little that...
You're not really, the rear port is not really doing that much. Right. So, we just didn't want to have to build a sealed design. Thank you very much. Yeah. So in satellite speakers, real small bookshelves or satellite speakers, if they have a rear port, most of the time the manufacturers will tell you just shove them right on the wall. Nobody cares. It's when you're worried about something like bass output from a subwoofer in your case, or a bookshelf or tower speaker, that rear port needs at least 6 inches to breathe. John and Bob and Andrew and probably a few other people, he says. So how close does the SVS SB1000 Pro come to the old SB2000? Not the Pro, the original one. And what about mixing the old 1000 models with the new 1000 Pro models? Will they play nice? Did you guys listen to the interview? Because we talked about this with Gary.
Yep.
I mean, it has a little bit lower output. I think it went from 24 hertz down to, now it plays cleanly minus 3 dB down to 20
in the SB
it's got a little
model.
Bit more output in the SB model. I don't think is it any louder? I don't think it really much louder.
I said it got the 1000 Pro got a little bit louder than the 1000.
Oh, right.
Particularly in the PB, because he went to a larger driver and more port space. So, I mean, he mentioned how if you just took the new driver and new amplifier and put it in the old PB1000, that you might get some port chuffing because the output capability is higher of the new 12-inch driver, and so that's why they went dual ports. So, they play a little bit lower, they play a little bit louder than the 1000 series. Now, if you were not anywhere near to the maximum output capabilities of your 1000 series, then the 1000 Pro series is going to play along with your 1000 series just fine. As Gary mentioned in the interview, you have the option of call SVS and be like, hey, I got a 1000 series. Yeah, it's from 5 years ago. You're not going to get full price that you paid for it, but they're gonna do something for you. You're going to get more than zero back in return for upgrading to a 1000 Pro. So if that's really important to you, that they completely perfectly match, then they can help you out. Give them a call. Now, if we look at the 1000 Pro series to the 2000 series, not Pro, the original 2000 series, if we go by the CEA 2010 measurements, there's basically 1 decibel difference in favor of the 2000 series. So the 1000 Pros now come really close to that original 2000 series. Specifically with the SB 1000 Pro versus the SB 2000, what they've done with the tuning actually has that 1000 Pro, according to their own measurements, staying linear lower. So, I mean, that's not the natural response that the driver would have. They've clearly done that with the DSP.
DSP, right.
But, we're talking a 1 decibel difference now. So, unless you were literally at the maximum of that 2000 series, the 1000 Pros are going to play real nice with the original 2000s.
Right. Well, and that's what Gary kind of said, there's going to be a reason why these things exist, and you're going to see some benefits. And yes, if you compare them to the older ones, you might see that the entry level SB 1000 Pro now is a little bit, I mean, if you think about it, that 2000, the 2000 series, was almost the equal of their flagship at one point. That's how good they've gotten at these things. So, yeah. I mean, they're going to they're all going to play nice together, really. It's just whether or not, depends on the size of your room and how much headroom you had left based on the size of sub you bought. Like Rob, he's got lots of headroom.
I do.
All of the headroom.
I do.
Alan and his family recently moved into their new house. His home's theater setup is in a large, completely open room. He's put down a thick area rug, and he plans to add acoustic treatments wherever he can, but realistically, he's pretty much got the front wall and not much else. I would beg to differ. You have a whole ceiling, sir. And a carpet that you could put down in front of you. His Pioneer Andrew Jones speakers stayed at his old place when they sold it, so he was on the hunt for new speakers. Via Twitter, Rob suggested the Cut LS50s would be a good option, mainly due to the very even dispersion, which would hopefully help with the less than ideal acoustics in this room, and also with its wide seating area. Alan expected an Ascend Sierra 2 recommendation, but followed Rob's Twitter advice and tracked down some LS50s. To his surprise and disappointment, he didn't think they sounded any better than the Pioneer Andrew Jones speakers he had left behind. He wasn't hearing any additional detail in the treble, which he had expected, so he returned them. He tried listening to some different speakers at his local Best Buy, and the only ones that stood out to him were some Martin Logans, but those were way over his price limit. But given that everything else he auditioned and sounded great to him, he started getting suspicious. So he went to audiocheck.net and started using some test tones. It turns out he can still hear 10 kilohertz fairly well. Above that is mostly gone. But the big shock to him was that 2 kilohertz to 8 kilohertz took about 50 dB of boost to sound equal in volume to the lower frequencies to his ears. God, it sounds like a headache waiting to happen. He discovered he has hearing loss, and he hadn't realized it. He tried some internet direct hearing aids, but those were a bust, so he wound up with hearing aids from Costco who have actual audiologists and hearing aid models that can be adjusted and tuned properly. He's still getting used to them, but he's got the treble back. He's realizing now how much movie dialogue he's obviously been missing for years, and he's thinking that the Pioneer Andrew Jones speakers were probably a whole lot better than he used to give him credit for. In the meantime, he had ordered some Ascend Sierra 2s and a pair of Klippel reference Premiere to try. Well, if you wanted to hear treble, you got some clips there. With his newly corrected hearing, the Klippel sounded bright, and the Ascends sounded amazing, at least in the sweet spot. Even though the Ascends have wide horizontal dispersion, they just didn't sound uniform across all of his seats. So he tried a pair of SVS Ultra bookshelf speakers. He's mostly happy with those, but he's questioning whether they're exactly what he wants. Basically, just in the sweet spot, he liked the Ascend Sierra 2s more. So is there something that can deliver that level of quality, but with uniformity across all of his seats? He's gone through a lot of changes, so you'd be fine with it if our blunt answer is stick with the SVS Ultras and be happy with what you got. But since he still has the opportunity to make changes, now's the time. If we would recommend something else to him, lastly, everyone please protect your hearing, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this room is extremely reflective and bright. I mean, I think would be the nice way of saying it. Yeah, he's got flat walls. There's almost nothing that's absorptive in here except for the couch and the chair that we can see in this one picture.
Yeah, he did say he was going to put down a thick rug and hopefully have some treatments on the front wall, but that's realistically about it.
Yeah, so almost certainly underneath his, he's got a countertop behind, after a space behind it. I'm almost certain that there's going to be some doors or drawers or something there, so he won't be able to treat that almost certainly. That would be my guess, based on the depth that I'm seeing here. It's probably got stuff on both sides. So that's kind of out as far as a place to hide treatments. And then behind that was almost certainly kitchen, so there's no place for treatments there. The left wall is a glass sliding door that opens up to a porch, so that's out. He's got a couple of pictures on the walls that maybe he could do something there. Yeah, so I am going to say that I think you should stick with what you have, and that's mostly because I think that the limiting factor here is not the speaker, it's the room.
Yes.
And if we're not willing to do anything about the room or unable to do anything about the room, then when you get something that ain't half bad, you should stick with it, because I think that it is, the major upgrades that you could do to your sound in here involve room treatments and a bunch of other stuff, none of which you're going to be capable of doing. So get the rug down. If you can put some room treatments up, I mean, behind the speakers is not really the first place we want them to be anyways.
But I mean, that's just about getting some of the echo out of this room, which I'm all for. And I mean, it kind of makes sense with the speakers that did stand out to him before he had his hearing corrected, because it was things that do have a bit more directionality to them and gave a bit more direct sound straight to each ear individually because of that, the Martin Logan electrostatic design, the ribbon tweeter design. But, you know, once you move out of the sweet spot, that you don't get that same effect in all the rest of the seats. I in no way disagree with Tom's advice that, if you just stick with the SVS Ultras, you're pretty darn safe. What's funny to me is that I have come back full circle to the first thing I recommend, which is I think the KEF LS50s might actually be what we're looking for. You understandably rejected them originally, but now you've never heard them with your hearing aids. So if you could actually track them back down and get them again, I'm like, I think I actually got this right originally.
Yeah,
that's about it.
And that's unfortunately correct. So now that you've made the change, now that your hearing has been corrected and you're planning on buying a rug, like what you should have done, now that we know, Monday morning quarterbacking here, what you should have done is got the hearing aids, got the room, you get the rug down, put up any room treatments you're going to do, and then start auditioning speakers. You don't audition the speakers in the reflective room. You do whatever you're going to do in order to make things sound as good as they can. Then you start auditioning speakers. You halfway through your audition process, or a little bit more than halfway through, you realize you had some hearing loss. That's at that point you should start over again. I don't know about you, but ordering another pair of LS50s and then with the potential of maybe sending them back just feels wrong. but
it's my honest, like, for everything that he described, I'm like, I arrived back at where I started.
I would give it a shot, and I don't know that I would necessarily order the Ascends again and all the other stuff again, but I think I would stick with the SVS and say, okay, let me get these LS50s in here, take a listen to those, and then compare them to the SVS. And if you really like the difference there, or you don't, whatever, choose between those two and know that you'll get a really good speaker. I don't know that it's ever going to be really good across all these seats. I just don't know.
I did, like, because lots of people are either getting hearing aids or going to need them. Please be careful with not overdoing the volume on your speakers, because everything you're hearing is now being amplified. You have to remember that, like, those hearing aids are amplifying everything, and if you crank everything up and then it's being amplified on top of that by your hearing aids, you are going to continue to do ever more damage to your hearing. So unfortunately, it's something we don't have a way to fix our hearing yet. I wish we did, but the only thing you can do is prevention as an ounce of cure.
Right. Okay, I have to see what time it is. I gotta get.
Yeah, you got 8 minutes before you gotta go.
Yeah. So how long is this one? Not too long. Okay, we gotta do this, and then I may cut out, and you can do the call out because I need to go. Jack says, without troubling us too much with all the details, Jack has 4 custom subwoofers being delivered to him. Each of them have 6 drivers, separate amplification, and complicated wiring. Okay, whatever. I read that and didn't understand a single thing, so let's go on. He wants to test them outdoors first to make sure everything is wired correctly, that there are no defective drivers, 24 of them, and none of them are out of phase, and that there aren't any unexpected resonances within the cabinets. He doesn't want to test them in-room because there would be too much confusion and too many variables. He wants as close to an anechoic test as possible. That way, it'll make any troubleshooting inside the room much easier. At least that's the idea. So with a UMic 1, Room EQ Wizard, and a laptop on hand, how does he go about performing ground plane measurements? Is it as simple as lay the sub on the ground, use his mic stand to position the UMic 1 just above the ground 2 meters away and play a sine sweep? Can he just plug his laptop's 3.5mm audio output directly into the separate subwoofer amplifiers via an adapter cable? The Room EQ Wizard files all describe plugging your computer into the AV receiver via HDMI, but he doesn't want to introduce an AV receiver into the single chain while testing if he can help it. Can you walk him through how to take these measurements? First of all, I would totally use an AV receiver. Okay, I would not use the 3.5 audio output because that's going to be noisy.
Yeah.
Second, ground plane measurements is exactly what it sounds like. It is a ground plane measurement. I mean, most subwoofer manufacturers, they put their subwoofers up in the air to get it out and then put a mic 2 meters in front of it. or 1 meter, depending on how they're doing the measurements, in order to do that, like on a stick, like
Right.
high
Yeah,
up.
I mean, the thing about ground plane that you have to be aware of is that it's not just a matter of having the subwoofer and the microphone both on the ground. The idea is that you have no reflective surfaces anywhere within 55 feet of you, other than
so
the
out in the
ground.
middle of a field.
Yeah,
Yes.
so it's not.
And then you would put, like, a lot of times they put like a big piece of 2x, like a plywood, and then they'll put the microphone on the ground, it's on the plywood, and then the subwoofer is, you know, on a flat surface 2 meters away from it or 1 meter away from it, and then they take the measurements there. It is not on a stand; it is on the ground.
Yeah. I mean, you could have it like on a boom stand, and you get the boom stand so that it's like literally right on the ground, parallel to the ground. So physically, that's what you have to do. But the whole point of the ground plane measurement is that the only reflecting surface is the ground, and you are mathematically eliminating that by having the sound source and the measurement device both on the ground. So that is the purpose there. It's not just a matter of it being the ground. If you have a wall that's 10 feet away from you, then you've ruined the whole idea of it. I would plug into an AV receiver. It's very simple. Set your output to be 2-channel stereo. I realize you're only testing subwoofers, but you're sending a full range signal. Put the AV receiver into pure direct mode. It is not touching anything other than decoding the digital signal that won't have noise in it like your headphone jack might, and just sending out the full range signal. What it gets sent is set up in Room EQ Wizard. So you can say, okay, only play the sweep up to 300 hertz. Don't play it all the way up to 20 kilohertz out of a subwoofer. So that's set in the source. To do this whole, because like testing each of the individual 24 drivers, 6 of them in each of your subs, if you want to make sure that all of them are in phase with one another, you have to be able to test them one at a time. You can't just send one signal.
But the easiest way to do this is to make sure that the red and the black are wired correctly within the driver. So you just take take some wires. You connect them to the red and the black on the outside of the driver. You take a battery, a AAA battery, and you take the red one and put it to the the plus, and then the black one, you tap it to the minus on the battery. Does the driver push out or push in?
Yeah, you want to make sure all of them
do that. And you do that before. You can do that while they're all sitting in your house. You don't got to do that outside. Don't worry. And at that point, you know that if you put red to red and black to black, everything will be in phase. Yeah. That's all you have to know. Yep. So that the phase part of it's easy. You can do that in the house. Cabinet resonances, good luck.
Yeah.
I mean, good luck with that. I don't know how you do that. I mean, I don't know. Do you knock on the thing? I mean, how do you do it? You put the drivers in there, and you knock on it, and then listen. I mean, I don't know. So that's a completely different animal to me. So I don't know how to measure that.
Yeah, that's all we got to say on that.
But the rest of it's fine. So when we give a projection screen size recommendation, are we saying the diagonal screen size the same as we would a flat panel TV, or are we saying the projection screen width, since it isn't necessarily given that projection screens will have a 16:9 aspect ratio? If I'm talking about a screen, it is 16:9. Okay. Whatever, Rob does whatever he wants. But yes, it is always in diagonal, unless we specify we're talking about the bottom or the side measurement, but we're almost never doing that. Yeah, so a 120-inch screen is a 16:9, diagonally measured 120 inches.
Yeah, if we're just throwing out a screen size, we are talking about a 16:9, and we're talking about the diagonal. I agree that it's not necessarily the most sensible thing to do. Having the width when we're talking about field of view is actually more useful. I have to calculate from the diagonal what the width actually is and work my way backwards from there. But yeah, when we just throw it out there, we're talking about that. If I'm specifically talking about the width of a screen, I will at least try to preface that and specify that. Throwing out the number, it's the diagonal.
All right. So who we have left, or are you going to keep going without me? Because I think we only have 5 left.
Oh, we should be okay. Yeah, we'll hold on to these. We got Mark. We have Julian. Let's see. I scrolled too far. So we got Lance, Manny. He's got several. So then Joe and Dave and Christian. Okay, that's all on the list. And then I got a whole bunch that came in on this Monday. So yeah, who knows? Oodles of questions.
All right. Get your question answered. Just ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. We want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Ari for going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, as well as our 122 patrons over at patreon.com.
For sure, Ari, thank you very much for the PayPal donation, and patreon.com/AVRant podcast for anyone who wants to sign up for an automatic monthly donation. Thanks very much to our 122 patrons over there.
I want to thank Mark for writing a review on Epson's website and mentioning us. Dale for talking us up to SVS and buying, I think, everything they sell. Bertrand for talking us up to electronicsforless.ca. And the notes of gratitude we have from Dan, Bob, Mark, and Joe.
Indeed. I'll just repeat quickly. Mark, thanks for talking us up on Epson's website. Dale, thanks for talking us up to SVS. Bertrand, thanks for talking us up to electronicsforless.ca. And then Dan, Bob, Mark, and Joe. Appreciate those notes of gratitude and encouragement from you. Appreciate everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions. It's wonderful.
For AVRant, I'm Tom Andry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.